and welcome to who's joined us here today at City Hall, and a big shout out for those who have joined us online. Let's go straight into the agenda of the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting. So, item 1, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Assembly Member Shah, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Chair's announcements. I have a few announcements. Can I firstly welcome to the public gallery journalism students from City University, students from Hillingdon Adult and Learning Centre. You can shout if you're here. Students. Can't you? Oh. Let's look at the people in the box.
It's difficult for us.
Okay. Can only look at the people in the box up there, see if they can give us some more volume. Yeah? And then I'll shout. Okay. Can you hear me, Assembly Member Russell? Yes. Okay. Right, well, what I said was, can I firstly welcome to the public gallery journalism students from City University? Are you here? Yeah. Bring some energy into the room. Students from Hillingdon Adult and Learning Centre. Okay, student from Union of UCL. We'll dock them because they're late. Undergraduate students from the London School of Economics. And MA Multimedia Journalism students from Westminster University. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've had a request for a Mexican wave. So starting over there, we go, we love London. Off you go. What Mexican wave go? Oh, all the way over. All the way over. All the way over. Where is it? Hello. But thank you. Okay, now, right. Can I now go on to provide an update on some recent Assembly activities? The Assembly has had a very busy month. So far, we've examined modern slavery in the capital, the impasse between Car Giant and the OPDC, London City's airport's expansion plans, the domestic abuse bill. We've written to the former mayor asking questions about his past actions and decisions, as well as producing reports on the rising tide of hate crime in London and the Garden Bridge. And members will know, because they've been informed, that the Oversight Committee has decided to pause its most recent investigation. Going on to item 2, declaration of interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Noted. Can I ask the Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest pecuniary interest or other relevant interest where they relate to items on the agenda for today's meeting? None. Thank you. Okay, item 3, the minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on 5th September 2019 and the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held on 12th September 2019 to be signed by the Chair as a correct record? Yes, agreed. You agreed. Okay. Do you want to update the Assembly?
Yes.
And I'm just going to pass over to the Deputy for an announcement.
Yes, I'm sure that members of the Assembly will wish to congratulate the Chairman on being admitted as, the ceremony hasn't yet taken place, admitted as a Freeman of the City of London.
Congratulations.
And donation towards the sheep would be most appreciated. Thank you very much. It's a great honour, and it's to do with the work that I do and we do here working for Londoners. So let's then go to the Mayor's report. Can I ask the Assembly to formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period from 30 August to 3rd of October? The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Over to you, Mayor.
Good morning. I strongly condemn the Extinction Rebellion protesters who have targeted the London Underground and DLR this morning. This illegal action is extremely dangerous, counterproductive, and is causing unacceptable disruption to Londoners and visitors who use public transport to get to work. It's also a massive burden on our already overstretched police officers. I urge demonstrators to protest peacefully and within the boundaries of the law. Chair, since we last met, Brexit has been dominating the political landscape once again. The continuing uncertainty caused by the failures of this government is not only holding back London's businesses, but causing enormous concern for EU Londoners. The October the 31st deadline is fast approaching, yet the Prime Minister is still saying he would take us off the cliff edge with a no-deal Brexit, which would be disastrous for London. As from what we know about Boris Johnson's possible deal, it represents an extreme hard Brexit for most of the UK, which would damage jobs, growth and prosperity for years to come. What is being offered now is a million miles away from what was promised in 2016. No one voted for a bad deal. No one voted for no deal at all. That's why, as Mayor, I'll continue to put pressure on the government to do the right thing, to take no deal off the table for good, and to let the British public have the final say through a public vote with Remain on the ballot paper. Since the last Mayor's question time, I've also been working on a number of other initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. These include continuing on starting to build more social and council homes, ensuring our transport system remains affordable for all, cleaning up our toxic air, supporting small businesses, announcing millions of pounds of investment to support further education and skills, tackling reoffending rates, and continuing to do everything possible to tackle violent crime, not only by cracking down on criminals, but by tackling the root causes of violent crime. And this includes investing £4 million to embed more youth workers in hospitals. I've also, Chair, been asked for 2 oral updates. In answer to Senator Member Hall, the right to peaceful and lawful protest should always be upheld. But there is also a balance to be struck by the police when they take operational decisions about how to manage these. The Met took a more proactive approach to policing the protests, including preemptive activity to prevent serious disruption. The Met have also taken swift action to seize 8 10-ton lorries worth of equipment that was designed to enable protest groups to remain on the streets for long periods of time. Neither I or my Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, were consulted before this decision was taken. It was an operational decision. In a meeting the following day, I discussed both the reason for the decision and the process with senior police officers. There's also, Chair, a request for an oral update from Senator Member Berry. Neither I nor the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime were informed before the Met Police took the operational decision to impose a Section 14 order on Extinction Rebellion autumn uprising on Monday night. I met with senior officers the following day to seek further information on why they deemed this necessary. I asked senior officers to find a way for those who want to protest the climate emergency we face to be able to do so legally and peacefully in London. I received assurances that neither Extinction Rebellion or other climate change protesters are banned from protesting lawfully and peacefully in our city. I continue to condemn the actions of those who have broken the law over recent days, and I'm particularly angry at those who have targeted the DLR and the London Underground. This is extremely dangerous, counterproductive, and is causing unacceptable disruption to Londoners who use public transport to get to work. It's also an unfair burden on our already overstretched police officers. Public transport is essential to tackling climate change, and millions of Londoners rely on it to get about our city every day. Illegal action by some protesters over the past 10 days has put undue pressure on already overstretched police officers, and demonstrators should bear this in mind when considering any further actions. The Met have been clear that if Extinction Rebellion wish to protest lawfully, they can reach out to them and they'll work out with them how to try and facilitate this.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Berry.
Yes, thank you. So just on the Section 14 order, do you know when the last time a citywide Section 14 order was issued in London? Has this ever happened before?
I'm not aware of the answer to your first question.
Fair enough. You said in your statement today and yesterday that you were not consulted ahead of the decision taking place. But it seems from the relevant act that a complete ban across London, as opposed to conditions being placed on individual actions, can't just be imposed by an officer on the ground. It's a much bigger decision than that. Do you feel like you should have had a role in making this decision?
I think that's one of the issues, Chair, that the Court's currently considering. I think it's inappropriate for me to comment on a case that's live in the Court. I understand there's a hearing today.
There is a hearing today, and that is one of the grounds on which they are challenging it. So this was one of the things you discussed with the police on the day after Monday's decision?
We had a wide-ranging conversation about the actions taken the night before, yeah.
Okay, obviously I have grave concerns about the effective ban on protest across London. You've asked the police to find a place for them to protest legally and peacefully. Have you made any progress with that? That seems to me the key to giving people the human right to protest somewhere within London.
I think it's important for those who are organising protests to work with the police to try and ensure that any protest is peaceful and lawful. So my message to Extinction Rebellion, those organising protests, is speak to the police. There's a protest taking place this Saturday which may involve more than 1 million people. They are working with the police. And similarly, my message to Excise to work with the police to try and facilitate a peaceful and lawful protest.
Okay, thank you. We'll look forward to seeing what the court case comes up with today. I think there's a genuine issue about powers here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
Mr Mayor, I'm very concerned because you are not backing the police 100% on this, and it's absolutely many of our views that you should be. You talk about lawful protests. 1,600 of them have been arrested. They're causing mayhem on the streets. And the only time you start to say, oh, well, I'm going to get tougher on this, is when they're on one of your trains. The fact is, the public took things into their own hands today and pulled somebody off the top of a train, and then, I believe, hit him. That is not good, and quite frankly, it should be laying at your door. You called them allies to start with. The minute their Section 14 is put in, you're on top of the police saying that you didn't know about it, etc. You should be supporting
Can I have the
our
question?
police, shouldn't you?
Shouldn't you? What is the question? Come on.
Sorry, if you...
No, can I have a question phrase, please?
I said you should be supporting the police, shouldn't you?
Okay.
I do support our police. One of the reasons why I've been so angry about the cuts from the government over the last 9 years is because it's letting the police down. We have in London, Chair, fewer police officers in the last year than any time since 2003, yet population has risen by 2 million, and it's because I support the police. And I see how under-resourced and overstretched they are. I've been lobbying for those resources. I've been quite clear since the protests began. My message to those protesting is I accept, and I last year said there was a climate emergency. It's really important for those who protest to do it peacefully and lawfully. Now, I've made the point on a number of occasions that this year we've had more extractions to do with public order issues than any year since records began, made more difficult by the massive cuts made by the Conservative government. And if you want to be pro-police and support the police, Senator Hall, join with me in saying to this Prime Minister to reverse the cuts this government's made over the last 9 years.
Mr. Mayor,
that's the best way to be pro-police for Londoners.
Deflect all you will. You started the whole conversation this morning by a tiny little bit on Extinction Rebellion and then went into your normal nonsense about Brexit. You are responsible for London. The streets out there are in absolute chaos because of these Extinction Rebellion.
Assembly
Do you
member.
not think you should...
Can I have a question?
If you would wait, Madam
No,
Chairman.
I'm not
Do
going
you
to
not
wait
think
for
that
you.
you should
I
be-
want a question from you. Thank
She's
you.
asking
I'm
it. You're
asking a
interrupting.
question.
Right.
Do you not think that you should be doing your job properly, looking after the streets of London, and not bothering yourself with Brexit and constantly blaming the government for everything, because that's all you ever do?
Well, Chair, the short response to this question is if the cinema had read Operation Yellowhammer or some of the stuff leaked in Operation Kingfisher, she'll see the direct link between Brexit and a no-deal Brexit and public disorder on our streets and less safety in our city, in our country.
Mr Mayor, so
Chair,
far...
Chair,
You'll let him answer.
I think my answer was a fifth of the length of the question. And the
All right,
second
we'll listen
point...
about the government some more, if that's appropriate.
And the second point Chair would make in relation to Brexit is we know that just in the last few weeks the government spent £100 million on adverts telling people to get ready for Brexit. Imagine the officers we could have employed with that £100 million. But the third point is the government is going to spend £4 billion dealing with the consequences of a no-deal Brexit. Imagine the support that could have given our city, £4 billion on dealing with the consequences of no deal. So I'm sorry that Conservative members can't see the link between Brexit and police. And I'm sorry if the Assembly member can't see why Brexit is so important to our city. I can, which is why I don't apologise for talking about it.
And I'm sorry that you don't understand what wasting money is. £16 million at the absolute minimum has been wasted so far on Extinction Rebellion. The same amount was lost in April this year. And yet you don't come down hard enough and say, I support the police, I support Londoners, there's enough of this nonsense. You should be doing that, Mr. Mayor. Are you not concerned about the amount of money that is being wasted on this?
Well, Chair,
there isn't a question there.
That was a
like
question.
That was a question.
There is
a very
not a
clear
question.
question.
There is not a question. I heard
Shut
no
me
question.
down then, if you will.
Right?
Yes, if you...
I would ask the member to repeat her question so that we're all clear what the question is.
No, stop the clock. If you're not listening...
No, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question. Can I hear your question?
Okay, I said, and I'll say it again loud and clear, are you not concerned about the amount of money that is being wasted on policing these Extinction Rebellion movements?
Thank you.
Are you not concerned about that? Because £16 million this time, more than that last time, yes, that could have gone into police officers as well, which we would rather, because also you're in charge of an absolute crime epidemic on our streets. So wouldn't you rather the money went to that than went to policing Extinction Rebellion?
Chair, one of the reasons why governments of the past and this government recognised that we should receive additional money as a national and international capital city is because as a capital city we receive often state visits which lead to protests being made which have policing requirements. We also in our city have a number of sporting events and cultural events which require policing for those events, but also we have protests. And so this Saturday, for example, we have up to maybe more than 1 million people protesting in our city that will require policing. And one of the things about living in a democratic society is that people are allowed to protest peacefully and lawfully, and we should make sure the police have the resources to police those protests, and they should be encouraged to do so peacefully and lawfully. What I wouldn't want to do is to say, for example, people shouldn't protest because we haven't got the resources to police those protests. The key thing is to protest peacefully and lawfully, but to give our police the resources they need to police a national and international capital city. And the short point on this is, according to the government's own calculations, we receive inadequate sums to police a national and international capital city, which is why I've been lobbying for more resources, but also making £1 billion worth of cuts from our police service over the last 9 years doesn't help matters. So if the Assembly member is keen to be a pro-police politician, work with me, lobby the government, get us more resources for our police.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Can I remind members, it's not all we require for them is to put the question. Thank you. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr Mayor, do you think the Commissioner failed to inform you about her actions because you've demonstrated a lack of interest in maintaining public order and are much more interested in talking about Brexit?
Well, I think that's a question you've got to direct to the Commissioner, not to me. I can't read into what was the mind of the police officers.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the Mayor's follow-up? No. So let's go to item 5, questions to the Mayor, as set out on the priority order paper. And the first question is question 2019-1985-7 in the name of Assembly Member Cooper and is entitled Brexit.
Well, your
answer, please just answer Assembly Member Cooper's question. Thank you.
Chair, with the government refusing to clarify when and how it intends to comply with the law enacted by the Benn Act, there remains a very real risk of a no-deal Brexit at the end of October. We have to hope that common sense and the law will prevail in securing an extension, but nothing can be taken for granted, and a disastrous no-deal Brexit in a fortnight is a real risk. Any form of Brexit would do long-term damage. However, a no-deal Brexit would be the worst of all possible scenarios. Leading economic forecasters, the Bank of England, the Office for Budget Responsibility and Institute for Fiscal Studies conclude that a no-deal Brexit is likely to be followed by a recession in 2020 and UK debt levels would reach their highest level since the 1960s. This would fall hardest on London's most deprived households. Their prospects of staying in work are most likely to be diminished in a recession. They've already suffered the worst effects of welfare reform and austerity, and lower wage growth and high food prices will push them even more into poverty. Uncertainty around Brexit has determined many businesses, uncertainty around Brexit has deterred many businesses from investing since the referendum. UK productivity has suffered its worst drop in 5 years, and the latest GDP figures show the UK's economic growth is close to zero. We continue to work extremely hard to ensure plans are in place for a no-deal Brexit, should that occur on the 31st of October. However, I want to be clear that the very best that can be achieved is merely a mitigation of the worst impacts of a no-deal Brexit on Londoners and on our city. I'll continue to oppose a no-deal Brexit, which could be avoided completely by withdrawing Article 50. Ultimately, there must be a public vote with Remain on the ballot paper to give the public the final say.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Perhaps we can have a slightly more mature discussion about Brexit and the potential for different types of Brexit deal or no deal. The government, as you are aware, have released their no deal readiness report. What's your assessment of that report and what it might mean for London's economy?
The short answer is it would be disastrous for our economy. Leaving with no deal would simply cause problems with jobs, growth, prosperity, but also it's worth reminding ourselves that's when the negotiations begin to our future relationship with the EU. So if we do leave the EU without a deal on the 30th of October, that's not the end of it. That's actually when the real business begins in relation to our future trade deals with the European Union. And depending what trade deal we have, that has an impact on jobs, growth and prosperity in our city. We asked Cambridge Econometrics to do some analysis, and the one that was the scenario most damaging to our city was a no deal, not a member of the single market, not a member of the customs union, no transition period, and it appears that we're heading towards that scenario.
I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people, some who voted Leave, some who voted Remain, some who still support Leave, some who still support Remain, some who've changed their views. But I think a lot of people were expecting a deal to be negotiated, and we've had this really long period, first with one Prime Minister and now with another. Given all the evidence of the implications of a no-deal Brexit, do you therefore think that it's right for the Mayor of London to be supporting Londoners and businesses through what has actually been an extended period of uncertainty and trying to assist people over the implications of the deal rather than just washing your hands of this?
Well, I was with business leaders yesterday and spent lots of time speaking to businesses, but small, medium and large. And the point they make is there's nobody from government talking or listening to them, and it's really important. One of my roles, you'll be aware, is to promote the economy of London. I don't think I'd be discharging my duties as the Mayor if I wasn't doing so. And frankly speaking, any member of this Assembly who's not advocating for our businesses in London is not doing their job as a member of the Assembly, and they should be ashamed.
How important do you think it is that Londoners have a final say on any deal that is actually negotiated?
Well, here's the thing. Those who complain about a public vote need to explain why more democracy is a bad thing. What we've been offered now by this government is a million miles away from what's promised in 2016. You can go back and look at some of the quotes and arguments raised by prominent Brexiteers, from Boris Johnson to Michael Gove to Liam Fox to Nigel Farage. None of them talked about leaving the European Union without a deal. Most of them talked about us being members of the customs union and a single market and being able to do a trade deal over the course of an afternoon. So bearing in mind we're a million miles away now from what was promised in 2016, I think we should give the British public a final say. Do you accept the terms of exit on the scenario negotiated by the government with the option, now that you know, not in abstract terms, now you know the terms of exit, do you want to remain in the EU?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else? No. Okay, let's go on to the next question, and it's in the name of Assembly Member Bacon, delivering promises.
It's been withdrawn.
Thank you, Chair.
Has that been withdrawn? Next question, in the name of Assembly Member Berry, definition of affordable homes.
Thank you, Chair. As Londoners well know, the previous Mayor and the government pushed the definition of affordable home to breaking point. Their definition included homes to buy for close to £500,000 and homes to rent at 80% of market rates. When we started negotiating with ministers in 2016 for affordable homes funding, the entire budget was for intermediate homes to buy and there wasn't a penny available for rented housing of any sort. We've been pushing them every opportunity for more money for rented housing, and we've been building as many social rented homes as we can with the funding constraints we face. When I became Mayor, I scrapped the definitions used under the previous Mayor, and I've been very clear what I mean by genuinely affordable. First, homes for social rent, which includes council homes. Second, homes for London living rents set at 1/3 of local average incomes. And third, homes for shared ownership part buy, part rent, which helps Londoners buy without needing a large deposit. These three types of home have been at the heart of my affordable homes programme and my draft London plan. As I said earlier, it's only through our relentless perseverance that we managed to get any money for affordable rent. We then introduced our work-around solution of capping rents for London affordable rent homes at social rent levels. This allowed us to use national funding to deliver genuinely affordable social housing for Londoners. By using my funding and planning powers, we've been able to start building record levels of genuinely affordable homes. Under the previous Mayor's programme, the number of homes for social rent fell to 0. Last year, we started building nearly 4,000. Over time, as legacy schemes complete and my planning policies are fully implemented, an increasing percentage of London's new supply will be one of my preferred three types of affordable homes. For any others, I've introduced an income cap in my planning policies to make sure that where rents are different than the level I would like to see charged, they're still genuinely affordable for Londoners. Given the bare cupboard I inherited, we've made real progress. We're very clearly heading in the right direction. However, we need a fundamental step change in investment from the government if we're going to truly end the housing crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, I'm concerned about the number of dodgily definitioned homes still coming forward, but also within your proposed tenures, how they're defined. A lot of the affordable housing products that you say are genuinely affordable are aimed at people on median incomes, and that automatically makes them unaffordable for half of Londoners by definition who earn less than the average income. The London Tenant Federation says that the only genuinely affordable housing product that you are offering is social rent. Do you agree with that?
Well, I understand where they're coming from, but what we're trying to do is work within the rules we're given by national government. And so the national definitions are quite clear. How we're giving funding is quite clear. My ask to the government, to address your point head on, is for the amount of genuinely affordable homes that are social rent should be up to 70%. And the negotiations taking place with the government is to address that point, because you're right, many Londoners don't receive a living wage. Many receive the minimum wage, and we need more homes with social rent. So one of the things we're negotiating with the government for is to make sure we have far, far more social rent homes going forward.
We'll look forward to seeing better grants and more grants for social rent in future, for certain. I want to go back to my original question and what's going on at the moment within the planning decisions that are being made now and looking through the London Development Database. You mentioned your preferred 10 years. That's 3 of the 8 possible definitions of affordable housing. There's also affordable, intermediate listed there, starter homes, which do seem to be dying out, discount market rent, discount market sale. Now, apart from starter homes, 7 of those definitions are still being used within planning permissions being given in London. In the last full year we have 2018, a quarter of permissions are for 10 years within what we, I think, both would call dodgy definitions of affordable. It's still a bit of a mess. We know the word affordable has become meaningless. We know almost all of these definitions don't qualify as affordable housing. So can you give us a deadline from when, in planning terms, dodgy definitions will no longer get permission?
Well, there's 2 separate issues. One's allocation of grant money, 2 is planning. And so you'll be aware some of this grant money began in 2015, and that's why you mentioned the start homes. And we've tried to
I really want to concentrate on planning. Just can you tell us when they'll be phased out? Because there's still a quarter coming forward that are dodgy.
One is grant money, second is planning. So we have a draft London plan, not a London plan funnel. So let's wait and see when the London plan comes into fruition. Once the London plan is there, that will obviously take over the previous London plan.
And that'll wipe them out completely?
There'll still be some legacy schemes. Obviously, there are those schemes that councils consider which are below 150 units, but we want to eventually go towards our model. But obviously, if there is grant money available from the government, and if some councils are given permission, it's very difficult for us to get involved in those.
Okay, sorry, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Anyone else on this? No. Okay, just to flag up to members that this is the first of 4 other questions relating to Brexit. So, Assembly Member Curtin, yours is just about Brexit. Can I have the question, and can I ask the Mayor to be quite specific in his answer to the question?
The Assembly member asked for plans for a celebration on the 31st of October. Leading independent economic forecasters, including the OBR and the Bank of England, are warning this could likely lead to a recession. The government's own assessments are warning that could lead to consumer panic, rising crime, food shortages and economic chaos. In light of this, I don't really think, Chair, this is a cause for celebration. Like most Londoners, I wanted us to remain in the EU, and I campaigned hard for that in the run-up to the referendum. After the referendum in 2016, I said I would do what I could to help ensure the government was able to reach the best possible deal to leave the EU, and I engaged with the government, with Brussels and EU leaders. Retaining membership of the customs union and single market, as I called for, would have protected UK jobs and prosperity and averted the return of a border in Northern Ireland, as well as protecting the rights of EU citizens in this country and the Brits who have chosen to live on the continent. The government failed to progress this route over the last 3 years, preferring to negotiate a bad deal that would have us leaving the customs union and single market, which was rejected 3 times by Parliament. In light of this, Chair, I've got no plans to celebrate should we leave the EU on the 31st of October without a deal.
Oh, Mr. Mayor, come on, I know you love a celebration, and your answer, it seems to be kind of like one of these bad Hollywood movies that's all gloomy and apocalyptic, but really, that's not what's going to happen. I mean, you simply can't forecast all of those things that you said, but the good thing about leaving the European Union on the 31st of October is that we're going to have full control back of our sovereignty and of our money. We're going to have £39 billion that we would otherwise have to give to bureaucrats in Brussels, which we could spend on housing and schools and hospitals and all those good things that we want to do in this country. And we'll have back control of our territorial fishing waters, and we'll have British fish for British fishermen once again. And we'll also be able to have...
Member Curtin. It's very entertaining, but I want a question now.
Madam Chair, I'm just building up to the question.
Just put the question.
But the question, Mr. Mayor, is, given all the good things that are going to happen when we have Brexit, shouldn't we have a celebration for the 1.4 million Londoners who voted for Brexit?
Chair, when I am chairing the Mayor's Advisory Group with leading members of the police service, the fire service, the NHS, councils, utility companies, and discussing some of the concerns they've got in relation to a no-deal Brexit, it's not a cause for celebration. When I look at the consequences of the pound going down and the increase in food prices, inflation, I don't think it's a cause for celebration. When I speak to Londoners, and they're Londoners, by the way, who were here in City Hall 3 weeks ago, when we were offering free legal advice on immigration status, and they'd been here for many, many years, and they were in tears, worried about their future status in this country, it wasn't a cause for celebration. When Brandon Lewis talks about deporting EU citizens after December next year if they've not got secured status, I don't think it's a cause for celebration. And if you think it is, that speaks more to you and your values than it does to me.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I mean, what would be catastrophic is if we overturn the democratic decision of 17.4 million people taken in June 2016 to leave the European Union. Don't you think that you and other people who are calling for a second referendum, which may have on the ballot paper remaining, is absolutely wrong? We have voted to leave, and leave should mean leave, Mr. Mayor.
Well, Chair, here's the conundrum with those Brexiteers who advocated leave. They're unclear exactly what they meant by leave. If you read back, listen to and watch what campaigners who campaigned to leave were saying in 2016, they weren't saying leave the European Union without a deal whatsoever. They were saying things like, we will leave the EU and still be members of the single market. Or they were saying, we'll leave the EU and be members of the customs union and single market. Or they were saying, we'll have a really good trade relationship with the European Union. Nobody was saying leave the EU without any deal whatsoever, and nobody was saying we'd be deporting EU citizens who hadn't got secured status. And my point in response is, why are you scared of giving the British public a final say? What can be more democratic than giving the British public a final say? Why are you scared of democracy?
No.
That's
Assembly Member Curtin. Assemblyman, no, seriously, no, this is not a conversation between you and the Mayor. And Mr Mayor, you are not here to ask members questions. And I would just ask you to contain yourself to giving answers to their questions.
Chair, it's a rhetorical.
No, I don't want to, and we don't need rhetorical. We've got enough on our plate. Do you have any further questions?
Well, Mr Mayor, there's nothing scary about implementing the decision of the referendum in June 2016, and that's what we should actually do. But, Mr Mayor, I mean, I do feel that in some ways you are rewriting history here, because what we said in the debates going into the referendum and since then is that...
No, you're going off your question. You started about celebration. Bring it back to your question.
Okay, well, but back to the question, I will just build up to my next supplementary question, Madam Chair, is that, obviously, what we have said is that we are able to obtain a mutually beneficial free trade agreement in goods and services with the European Union. That is the end point, and I'm sure that you would probably agree with me that that's a good thing. Unfortunately, I'm out of my time, so I can't ask any further questions.
Thank you. You used it well.
Chair, this won't be the first time we disagree.
Now, can I just say again, we now go to Assembly Member Cooper's question, and can I just read this? This is quite specific. Are London's businesses ready for a no-deal exit from the EU, as the Minister, Michael Gove, suggested?
London's businesses are not ready for a no-deal exit from the EU. A no-deal Brexit in a fortnight would be a disaster for London. Some big multinationals have the resources to contingency plan, but we know the vast majority of small businesses, the lifeblood of London's economy, remain unprepared. According to a recent survey by the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, only 9% of London business leaders polled say their business is prepared for a no-deal Brexit, and nearly a fifth say they require support in planning for one. Another recent survey by the Federation of Small Businesses found that amongst their members who believe a no-deal scenario on 31st of October will negatively impact their businesses, nearly two-thirds say they're not able to plan for the impacts. Instead of providing the kind of certainty and practical advice that entrepreneurs and businesses needed to prepare for Brexit, the government committed £100 million to adverts announcing a Brexit deadline they cannot meet. Imagine the police officers or youth workers that could have paid for. A positive thing the government could do instead would be to do what the law requires and implement the Ben Act, no ifs, no buts, and request the extension from the EU that prevent a no-deal Brexit in a fortnight. It's clear that Brexit uncertainty has stalled business investment and productivity since the referendum. In London, business startups have fallen, business closures have risen, and there's been a marked decline in the net startup rate from 6.1% in 2016 to 1% in 2017. That's why I've stepped up advice and support available from City Hall during this important period.
Mentioned the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Federation of Small Businesses. Also, the British Retail Consortium stated that, and I quote, "We have been crystal clear that while retailers are doing everything they can to prepare for a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October, there are limits to what can be done." I think that completely contradicts Michael Gove's statement that everybody is fully prepared. What are businesses saying to you and the Deputy Mayor for Business?
They are concerned. You mentioned the retail consortium. I mean, for example, if you are a retailer selling food, fresh fruit, fresh vegetable, fresh produce, big concern, end of our season, Christmas is coming. Yeah. The ability to store some of this fresh produce is an issue. Big concern in relation to a weak pound increase in prices. A big concern in the lack of shared information from the government. What happens, for example, if there's a delay at the borders at Kent, Tilbury Docks or elsewhere, and that's just food. Big issue in relation to if tariffs are applied to goods. So all these are unknowns, which is making retailers extremely nervous, and businesses generally are worried about the uncertainty created by the scenario we currently face.
Now, one of the actions that you've taken is to set up the growth hub centres, and I wondered how the 9 new centres are going to be able to support businesses through this latest period of incredible uncertainty.
Well, the Brexit Business Resource Hub and the London Growth Hub have been used by hundreds of thousands of businesses across London. One of the things we've realised is actually some small businesses particularly need face-to-face advice, and so we will have five presences physically across London with 4 satellite presences as well. We're really going out doing one-to-one advice sessions, doing workshops. There is a concern, which is expressed by the survey figures I read out, that small businesses in particular aren't ready and aren't sure what to do to get ready. And if we do leave the EU without any deal on the 31st of October, the impact will be immediate. So we're trying to get to them as soon as we can, but working with the government to try and make sure more and more people know about the consequences should we leave the EU on the 31st of October.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And the next question, we go to housing needs. Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you, Chair. London's housing crisis has been decades in the making, with far too few genuinely affordable homes having been built for many years. In London, 56,000 households are homeless and live in temporary accommodation. 370,000 children under 16 are living in overcrowding, and rents have risen almost twice as fast as earnings since 2005. We will never be able to fully meet London's housing needs without a step change in the level of investment and powers from national government. But since taking office, I've used all the resources available, and we've begun building record numbers of genuinely affordable homes. We know the overwhelming need is for social rented housing. Under my predecessor, the number being built fell to almost zero, but we've begun to turn that around. Last year, we began building more genuinely affordable homes than in any year since powers were devolved to London, including record numbers of social rent. Through my new Building Council Homes for Londoners programme, we also helped councils start the most new council homes since 1984. Alongside my affordable housing programme, we've overhauled the planning system to make sure more new homes meet Londoners' needs. Under my predecessor, affordable housing in planning permission fell to just 13%, and even that was using his dodgy definition of affordable. As a result of our new approach, an independent evaluation by Grant Thornton, published in May this year, reported that genuinely affordable housing has risen to 36% in 2018. I've also set up the new London Land Fund to buy land for developments with high proportions of affordable housing. Through this fund, we've secured 50% affordable housing at North Middlesex University Hospital, a minimum of 50% affordable at the former St Anne's Hospital site, and over 1,000 homes with at least 60% affordable on the former Holloway prison site. But we're severely limited by the lack of public funding from government, and that's why, working with the G15 and others, we've estimated London needs £4.9 billion per year of government grant funding to build all the homes Londoners need. That's 7 times what we currently receive.
Mr Mayor, you said that you are building more new homes to meet Londoners' needs. Last year, according to your own figures, the number of GLA-funded affordable family-sized homes that was started went down by over 30%, from 2,892 to 2005. Do you think this will improve London's overcrowding problem or make it worse?
One of the reasons why there is more intermediate housing is that's the way the funding from the government is skewed. So because the government skews the funding towards intermediate housing, which tends to be 2-bedroom, you're seeing fewer social rented family homes that we need. One of the things we've done in the draft London plan, which wasn't in the previous London plan, was require boroughs to set size mix requirements for social housing. And this means local councils can set targets for family-sized housing that meet the needs of people in the local area. And so clearly, with more funding for social housing, we could have more social housing that families would want to live in.
If this is a problem with regard to intermediate homes, had the rules changed in the past year?
Now, the government's funding since we negotiated with them has been weighted towards intermediate housing. It's more so in 2015, as Senator Berry alluded to previously.
So
the funding was starter homes.
Why have they declined under the same rules? The number of family homes that are being built. Why have they declined under the same rules?
Well, there's 2 types of family homes we're talking. One is market value family homes, which is not affordable to Londoners, and 2 is social rented family homes, which is affordable to Londoners. Our focus is getting more of the latter because that's what Londoners need. Market value family housing is not affordable to Londoners, and so that's why you're seeing more and more people who are living in these family-sized homes having their grown children living with them, and what the grown children need is 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom properties that are affordable to move out of mum and dad's home.
Are you saying there's not a requirement for larger family homes?
Market value, there's never been a requirement for family homes under the previous mayor's housing strategy or our ones. What we've done in our strategy, different from the previous mayor's, is require councils to work out what they need for social rent family homes in their area.
Can you explain why, according to your own figures, the amount of overcrowding in London in 2017 and 18 is at its highest level for 9 years? That's 8.7% of all London homes. All London homes, not just affordable.
The answer is easy. It's a consequence of your government's welfare benefit policies. Because of the cap you introduced in relation to housing benefit, because not linking housing benefits to the local housing allowance. And what that's led to is families not being able to live in size homes commensurate with their family because of the welfare benefit changes made by your government. So if you feel strongly about this, work with me to lobby your government to reverse welfare benefit changes they've made.
Mr Mayor, you've removed all targets from your housing strategy and indeed the London plan for family-sized housing.
Not true.
How is that going to affect, okay, you can explain how that's not true, how is that going to affect overcrowding in London?
Well, let me read, Chair, if it helps the Assembly member, what the Draft London Plan 2019 says. Draft policy H12 states, and I quote, schemes should generally consist of a range of unit sizes. And it goes on and refers to, and I quote, a strategic and local requirement for affordable family accommodation. Draft policy H12 states, and I quote, for low-cost rent, boroughs should provide guidance on the size of units required by number of bedrooms to ensure affordable housing meets identified needs. And as I said, we're requiring councils now to set out targets for family-sized social housing that meets their specific needs. And our draft London plan, when it's fully made into a London plan, will assist councils do just that.
You've left that responsibility to the boroughs and an abnegated responsibility for the numbers. What percentage of family homes do you expect to be built over the next year?
Well, there's never been a percentage requirement on boroughs. We're criticised for doing that.
You've decided
so
not to do that.
What it means is a council will work out what the needs are for the borough, and different boroughs will have different requirements. So borough A may have, when they've done their assessment, fewer families who need family-sized social rent homes. Family B may, when they carry out their assessment, need more family-sized homes.
Do you think the 350,000 young people being brought up in overcrowded conditions will welcome your abnegation of responsibility?
What they'll welcome is us working together to lobby the government to reverse their welfare benefit policies that have led to this sort of overcrowding. What they'll welcome is the government giving me 7 times more funding to build more social rented homes and council homes rather than what we have at the moment, which is us receiving 1/7 of what we need. What they'll welcome is the government, rather than wasting £4 billion dealing with the consequences of no-deal Brexit, using that £4 billion to help build the homes that Londoners desperately need.
Mr Mayor, do you think that after Brexit you might actually pick up your proper responsibilities and look to the interests of London's young people?
Well, Chair, I'm astonished. I'm really astonished that the Assembly member doesn't see the link between
you
Brexit
terribly
and young
distracted
Londoners.
by one subject. You're not interested in public order. You're not interested in housing. You're not interested in the knife crime on our streets. You're only obsessed with Brexit. And this is from a mayor who we've elected to deliver on all those subjects, not Brexit.
Chair, the point that I'm astonished the Assembly doesn't realise the link that Brexit has to housing, to young people. Had he read, for example, the RICS report, the Royal Institute of Child Affairs report, they talk about the impacts on Brexit on house building. Had the Assembly member read the Bank of England's report, they talk about the impact of Brexit on house building. And it's really important for us to realise the consequences of Brexit and a whole host of issues. It's the proceeds of taxes raised by people working, by the growth created, that leads to us being able to fund these public services. And I'm really surprised that the Assembly member doesn't understand the basic economy and the way it works.
I understand all too well, Mr Mayor. I just wish you'd give that speech from the top of a train in Canning Town.
Thank you, Assembly Member.
Sorry, Chair, I didn't hear that question.
I didn't hear it either.
I said I'd like you to give that speech from the top of a train in Canning Town.
Was that a question, Chair? Because I should respond. I think I should respond, surely.
No, you didn't put it in a question form, and I'm not going to have a bat and ball between the both of you. I'm going to go on to Assembly Member Copley, who has a question regarding housing needs.
I do, yes, thank you, Chair. I just was wondering, Mr Mayor, if you thought perhaps in terms of housing, and particularly in terms of affordable housing, it might be better if the Conservative group were to be lobbying their government to actually fund affordable housing in London properly.
Well, Chair, only Conservatives would heckle somebody who's advocating affordable housing for Londoners. And that tells you all you need to know about their priorities. And my point in relation to an answer to a question made from the Senator previously was, we need to recognise that central government's policies has a direct impact on what happens in London, from changes in welfare benefit, from lack of investment in affordable housing, from weighting the funding towards intermediate housing. And what they should be doing, if they are genuine, rather than making cheap party political points, is working with us to lobby the government to change their policy and have more investment for our city.
I think the figures are at the moment, the average is per year £700 million that London gets for affordable housing. Was it 4.9 or 4.7 billion pounds a year we actually need, according to the research that you did with the G15?
Absolutely. So we receive from this government less than half the monies we received from the Labour government between 2009 and 2010. According to independent analysis and experts, I know they don't like expert advice, but according to expert analysis, we would need 7 times what we currently receive to meet the needs of our city. And if they were sincere about meeting London's housing needs, they would be lobbying the government to get this funding. And by the way, by a remarkable coincidence, the amount of money we need to build the homes Londoners need is the same amount of money this government's wasting on no-deal preparations because of the consequences of the awful way they've negotiated with the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions about housing need? No. Okay. The next question to you from Assembly Member Desai. Does a no-deal Brexit risk making Londoners less safe?
Well, Chair, a no-deal Brexit risks the safety and security of our citizens by removing access to vital intelligence from European partners and our ability to bring offenders to justice. The default no-deal position, which we will have while we negotiate new processes, is grossly inadequate. The cost of no-deal is mounting even before no-deal has happened. If it does, it's been estimated that police forces will be expected to pay out £22 million to cover the impact. This money would be better spent on frontline policing. I'm increasingly concerned that this government is pursuing a ruinous no-deal Brexit at any cost. The reports from an unnamed source at number 10 that, and I quote, defence and security cooperation will inevitably be affected if the EU tries to keep Britain in against the will of its government, effectively holding these vital issues as a bargaining chip, is outrageous. It shows the government's willing to jeopardise the security of our citizens to drive through its agenda. One of the many policing and security benefits of working with the EU has been cross-border cooperation, improving the safety of Londoners. National policing experts have already warned that losing access to the European arrest warrant and Europol will make it harder to keep track of terrorists and serious organised criminals.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You said earlier this morning that, and I agree with you, that there's a link between Brexit and policing. And on Tuesday, Sir Stephen House, the Assistant Commissioner, gave us some examples of how Brexit, particularly a Brexit not planned for, would actually affect policing in a very practical sense. So we do know that dangerous offenders do cross borders in crimes such as modern-day slavery, indecent images of children, counter-terrorism operations, organised criminal networks operate across the globe. The Met Police work with the National Crime Agency and bodies such as Europol as part of the investigations. In fact, Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu said that a no-deal Brexit would create an immediate risk that people would come to this country, serious offenders, either wanted, or people who we do not know about. So, can you tell us how concerned are you that serious criminals will actually seek to capitalise on the no-deal Brexit? Do you agree with Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu that there would be some damage to our safety? And I quote him again, I can't put a scale on the damage to our safety.
Well, absolutely. Look, I mean, some members of this Assembly claim to be pro-police, yet ignore the police when they give them advice about the consequences of a policy they're pursuing. So let's be clear. Expert police officers have advised the government that following this scenario, leaving the EU without a deal would mean some of the tools they need to keep us safe they won't have. And what's the response from the Conservatives? Ignore the advice from the police and continue down the road of a no-deal Brexit. And you've heard from the Deputy Commissioner, you've heard from the head of counter-terror. If you listen to the National Crime Agency, if you listen to most senior police officers who know how this stuff works, they will tell you that we'll be less safe and less secure if we have a no-deal Brexit. That any alternative system will be more clunkier, it will be more expensive and lead to more delays.
I was actually going to ask you a question about the article of The Spectator, but you already referred to it. Don't you think it's actually, quite frankly, irresponsible to use language such as in that article, that everything to do with, quote, duty of sincere cooperation, unquote, will be in the toilet. This is actually what the article says, about, which is actually a threat that we use national security as a bargaining chip in the negotiations with the EU.
So we now know this government is willing to use EU citizens as bargaining chips, but also willing to play fast and loose with our security and use security as a bargaining chip. It demonstrates how shameless these people are.
And of course, this article is the Spectator, not the New Statesman.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question is on... Sorry, Assembly Member Hall.
You nearly forgot me there, Madam Chairman. Mr Mayor, Jean-Paul Juncker, who you've been quite sycophantic towards the last few months, has just tweeted, "Where there is a will, there is a deal. We have one. It's a fair and balanced agreement for the EU and UK, etc." So can I ask you, would you then, as there's a deal, and as you've been going on and on for more time than I'd care to think about there not being a deal, now that there seems to be a deal there, will you encourage all your colleagues to actually support it so that we can start, if nowhere else in this chamber, talking about London, which is what we're here to do?
Chair, can I just say I welcome this question from this member. It demonstrates a breathtaking ignorance of the way EU negotiations work. The idea that without seeing a deal, we would ask members of Parliament to sign up to a deal and vote for it shows how people's ideological views is clouding their judgment in relation to an issue which will have consequences not just for this generation, but generations to come. I find it breathtaking.
Mr Mayor, have Labour decided that whatever...
Assembly Member Hall, please, no. Can we just get an answer from the Mayor to your question?
It's just another rant about the government.
No, I'm sorry. The Mayor is entitled to be heard. Can I ask the Mayor to continue?
What I ask all MPs to do, is look at the merits of a deal and they decide on its merits whether you should support it, and then put that deal to the British public, let them have the final say. Do you accept the terms of Brexit as the deal sets out, with the option of remaining in the European Union?
Mr Mayor, if only any of us knew where Labour actually stood over Brexit, because you're all over the place. I was just merely saying it looks like there's a deal which we should applaud, and I was rather hoping that you would be saying today that you'd be positive about that, because after all, where would London be with a no-deal Brexit? Because come what may, we will have a Brexit.
Quite right.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Chair, is there a question there?
Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Assembly Member Cooper.
Mr Mayor, do you agree that it's absolutely ridiculous for Assembly members who have been in this room since 10 o'clock this morning, and while a deal has apparently been announced as having been negotiated with the EU 27, to suggest that we could advise anybody on how to vote on it when we cannot possibly have read it because we've actually been here the entire time?
Well, I hope, and many of us have been paying attention to Mayor's question time. Some couldn't be bothered to stay for the entire duration and have gone off to do something else, and others are looking at their phones. I'm focused on answering your questions because it's a really important way for you to hold me to account.
Thank you very much for that respectful
answer. Thank you. I mean, I'm aware that members are so multi-skilled that maybe it's possible to do many
entire treaty.
things.
Amazing.
Right. Assembly Member Curtin.
Once, I do see some sense in what you're saying.
It's happened before. Come on, it's happened before.
Any new treaty, which is what this is, it's not just a deal, it's going to be a treaty, needs to be carefully scrutinised over many hours, perhaps many days, in order to understand all the full implications of what the treaty says. And if it continues to lock the UK into a single market, into a customs union, into a new fisheries policy, into obeying all the directives and regulations and rulings of the European Commission and European Court of Justice, that wouldn't be leaving in full. And if that's the case, we should just simply leave with no deal on WTO terms. Isn't that the right thing to do?
Well, clearly no. But actually, the question is useful because it demonstrates there are different interpretations of what a good exit is. And that's why it's really important to have grown-up, sensible discussions rather than people hysterically shouting. And so what I'm in favour of is having that mature debate. And I think Parliament and parliamentarians should have that mature debate. reach a resolution on what they think is the best terms of exit if they agree to do one, and then trust the public, trust the British public. We are intelligent enough to reach a view, and now that we know, not in abstract terms, but in real terms, the terms of exit, let us choose whether to embark down that route with the option of remaining in the EU.
I do trust the decision of the public taken on the 23rd of June 2016.
Anyone else? No, thank you. Then let's go to the next question, which is on Operation Yellowhammer in the name of Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you, Chair. Since the prospect of leaving the EU without a deal threatened over a year ago, City Hall and the London Resilience Forum have been planning for the event of a no-deal Brexit. This has been seriously hindered by the government's unwillingness to share information. Yellowhammer was only released as a result of a leak. It makes for grim reading in itself, but there is still a lot of information the government won't share. We don't have any of the detail underlying the plan and assumptions, and we don't know what plans the government has to mitigate the problems it has identified. In this culture of secrecy, agencies have spoken out publicly. Last week, the chair of the British Medical Council said there is no sign of who is going to provide emergency transport service for critical medicines and medical supplies or extra freight capacity to guarantee patients can continue to get drugs they need in the event of a no deal. Numerous reports illustrate how a no deal will particularly affect the vulnerable, with price rises in essential goods pushing more people into poverty. We've asked for assurances that the government will provide hardship funds, but none has been forthcoming. Last month, I met Michael Gove to try and unlock this issue. He committed to help, and the restrictions placed on some key planning documents have now been loosened. This is welcome, but with 14 days to go, we desperately need more information from the government. Despite these difficulties, we continue to plan as well as we can, and last week I convened a mayoral advisory group bringing together key agencies to discuss the potential impacts of a no-deal Brexit on London. And from Monday, we will have strategic coordination groups meeting twice a week with the option of scaling these up to daily if required.
Thank you for that. Would you agree, therefore, that the Operation Yellowhammer document is remarkable for what it doesn't cover? Do you consider it provides enough information for local resilience forums to make contingency plans? Bear in mind that there are other ornithologically named government papers about no deal which have been kept secret, such as Operation Kingfisher, about the impact on business, which was recently leaked to the Sunday Times, and states that only businesses for which distress or loss of investment would be economically critical would be given extra support, so that only the largest businesses will be eligible for government help. And according to an internal Cabinet Office report last month, only 37% of small and medium-sized enterprises have made sufficient, or in some cases any, preparations for no-deal Brexit. Shouldn't this Operation Kingfisher paper also be published?
Absolutely. Look, let's park for a second the difference in views between the government and myself in relation to the merits and demerits of Brexit. You can park there. The key thing is to make sure we're as ready as we can be for the possible consequences. And so what I've said to the government through Michael Gove is, look, there needs to be a spirit of cooperation in relation to making sure the key agencies can prepare as well as they can do, and that includes businesses in relation to fresh produce, to make sure we mitigate against any possible consequence. That's why it's really important for them to share the information with us.
And then there's the Operation Snow Bunting paper about the police response, also not published. The ministers are reported to have voiced concerns that overstretched police officers from the cities will be sent to help transport problems affecting the Channel ports. Nearly one cabinet source is reported as saying, quote, "I can't believe we're planning to take officers off the street at a time of not rising knife crime." There's also plans to deploy police in and around supermarkets for fear of panic buying for food, causing chaos. And then, as has been mentioned, on Tuesday we heard from Deputy Commissioner Sir Stephen House, who confirmed at the PCC that key crime-fighting tools would be lost, their replacements would not be as effective, and he explained in detail why we would be left safe as a result.
So clearly somebody in government is a keen bird watcher. We've got Yellowhammer, Kingfisher, Snow Bunting, Black Swan. What's clear is, let's assume for a second, there are operational sensitivities why this information can't be released to the public. They should at least be shared with the agencies, the police and the authorities. They haven't been. And the problem is the government's working in silos, and sometimes some departments don't know what the other department knows. And what I say to the government is, look, like I said, park the differences we've got. Let's try and work together to make sure we address some of the concerns that you've articulated. And by the way, these are from the leaks. So we know the government's made underlying assumptions, planning assumptions. Work with us to make sure we can do what we can to mitigate the worst excesses of a no-deal Brexit.
And the other secret paper we know about is Operation Black Swan, apparently setting out the worst-case scenario about events that come as a surprise and could have huge repercussions. Isn't this the most important of all, and shouldn't this be published? And if there is a second referendum, which, like you, I hope there is, shouldn't the public have the full picture, including what is contained in all these and any other ornithologically named documents?
Well, absolutely. I think what the public should be given is all the facts, all the information. We now know, not in abstract terms, what leaving the EU would mean, but actually what it means in reality. So now we know what leaving the EU means, the terms of exit, the consequences. We can decide to accept that path, or we can decide to remain in the European Union, imperfect as it is.
Okay, thank you.
No. Then the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Bailey, Central Line CCTV.
Thank you, Chair. It's been clear for many years, since before I became Mayor, that the Central Line needs CCTV to help ensure the safety and security of passengers. Crime on the Central Line is not new, and when I first became Mayor in 2016, I was disappointed that there were no concrete plans in place for CCTV on the Central Line. But now, TfL is doing everything possible to get CCTV cameras up and running on the Central Line as soon as possible. As part of TfL's £380 million Central Line Improvement Programme, we have firm plans in place to install CCTV on all Central Line trains, as well as to make other improvements to ensure the trains are safer, more reliable and wheelchair accessible. Unfortunately, the existing train systems are unable to provide the additional power or lighting required for CCTV cameras. The existing lighting on trains is also likely to be insufficient to provide images admissible in evidence. The new Central Line CCTV system is integrated with the new train computers. All major contracts are in place and the first CCTV-equipped trains will be in operation on the Central Line from next year. The Central Line is London's second busiest line. It's also the longest line. Given the lack of investment or plans from the previous Mayor, and given the scale and complexity of the improvements and the need to keep trains in service, it's not possible for this to be delivered any faster than it is. At the same time as delivering CCTV, we're also working on other things to make the Central Line as safe as possible, as we know the most effective interventions adopt a combination of different approaches. The Central Line is a priority for the British Transport Police, and it's the most heavily patrolled line on the network. Notwithstanding massive central government cuts, there are 3,000 police and community support officers dedicated to policing the transport network. We have specialist operations taking place to target areas with the highest volumes of reports. The police are using all the tools at their disposal to investigate sexual offences, including over 12,000 station CCTV cameras, Oyster card data and witness statements to support investigations. Through major campaigns like Report It to Stop It, TfL is putting an unprecedented focus on tackling unwanted sexual behaviour on London's public transport and is encouraging thousands of more victims to come forward and report offences, with over 1,000 arrests being made since the campaign began. TfL and the police will continue to bring those committing crimes to justice and tackle issues like violence and sexual harassment until they've eradicated them from transport for good. Every Londoner or visitor should feel safe and confident to travel on London's public transport network, and I'll keep doing what I can to make this possible.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could you give us some more detail on the rollout of these cameras? When will the project be finished?
So they begin operation next year. All of the CCTV on Central Line completed by the end of the contract period, which I think is 2023.
Given the fact that we've known for a while that offenders deliberately focus on the Central Line because it has no CCTV, are you happy that it's going to take 4 years before this project is finished?
No, I'm really angry with the previous Mayor. The inheritance I had was awful. No plans in place, no procurement plans in place, no contracts in place. The legacy was awful. He also sacrificed the operating grant. So within the context of having no plans in place, we've gone from a standing start position. We found the money to make sure this happens, and we're going as fast as we possibly can. At the same time, we're doing all the other things that I've said we're doing to make sure we can keep public transport safe as we can.
Be that as it may, you have been Mayor for 3 years, so you've waited till this point to start. You could have started much earlier. So again, are you a bit disappointed that we're going to have to wait till 2023? If we got our current rate, thousands of women will be sexually assaulted in that time. So are you happy? Are you happy that you've done everything to make sure this will be delivered as quickly as possible?
No, I think it could have happened much faster had I inherited some plans. I mean, these sorts of contracts need to be procured. They've got to be designed. There's got to be a specification, and there's got to be the work undertaken to make sure we get the power and the operations working properly. Had the previous Mayor had plans in place, we could have made sure these were brought in much sooner, because there were no plans, even though, as I said, we've known for some time there's no CCTV on the Central Line. We've had to, from a standing start, do this. I've checked with TfL. We're going as fast as we can. clearly there are processes in place in relation to procurement, but also to make sure the power and operations are ready for the CCTV that we need. We've also looked at my request, is it possible to retrofit on the current trains? It's not. The power's insufficient, the lighting's inadequate. And one of the things I looked at, because I was appalled, the previous mayor did nothing about this. And we now know we're going as fast as we can. I've double-checked that we are. If we were to other alternatives, it would take a bit longer. And so there's two things, of course, value for money, but more important than that is safety of commuters. And so we've made sure there are other things taking place. You will remember the previous mayor closed our ticket offices on the tubes due to my review. They stayed open, but we employed more staff on the underground as well. You'll also be aware, because of the night tube, I had 100 more officers on the underground. So I'm confident we're doing what we can, but I'm always happy to listen to ideas, even from backbenchers, in relation to how we can improve the underground.
Can I just, we're talking about time. When did you start to look at putting CCTV on the
The TfL have been looking at plans on a rolling basis. There's 2 lines without CCTV.
When? Because if they've been looking at them on a rolling basis, was it prior to your arrival? Because then your first statement's incorrect, or has it been since your arrival? Have you insisted they look at plans for CCTV?
Well, I've always been conscious about safety. You go to my manifesto, you'll see where I talk about safety in my manifesto. Big concern that I've got. In relation to specific procurement plans, they can only happen when I've got the details in front of me. That can only happen when you're the Mayor of London. And so when I've become Mayor, I've seen the plans we have for the whole host of safety issues, not just on our underground, on our buses, on our trams, on the overground.
I'm talking in this specific case, you said there were a lack of plans. I'm just asking when you started looking at plans. When did your office direct TfL?
Look, as soon as I became mayor, we started looking at safety issues. One of the things that I did before the night tube began, for example, is make sure we had plans for policing on the night.
Sorry to interrupt you. Specifically, the central line. When were you looking at plans specifically for the central line?
So TfL have been working on these plans since I became mayor, and we're going as fast as we can. And so the first central line trains will have CCTV next year, and I've checked with TfL. That's as fast as they can possibly go. I've also checked with TfL, is it possible to retrofit CCTV on the current tubes we have? The answer is no.
So it's taken 3 years to get to the point of doing anything, and we're going to need to wait another 4 years before it's completed?
Well, if you think the only way to provide safety is CCTV, that's the wrong way to go about it. There's a combination of measures.
I'm speaking specifically about the CCTV. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but I'm just saying you said that there were no plans previously. I'm just asking, why has it taken 3 years to get to the beginning of doing anything? That's all.
I thought I beg your pardon, Chair, I thought the Assembly member was aware about the investment of the deep lines investment. I'm happy to send him a note. The deep lines investment is on 4 lines, on Central, on Piccadilly, on Bakerloo, on Waterloo and City. I thought he'd had the briefing. I'm sorry, Chair, I'll make sure that backbenchers are properly informed of investment in the underground.
Mr. Mayor, let's be clear. We're not talking about the deep lines. We're talking about the central line and hold on. We're not talking about that investment programme. We're talking about specifically when do you start looking at plans to put CCTV on the central line?
Chair, I think we're talking about cross purposes. So if I explain, the central line is part of the deep tube programme. It is quite deep.
I know that, Mr. Mayor. I know that. I'm trying to focus specifically on the safety of the central line and those particular CCTV cameras.
Well,
I just asked you a simple question. When did you ask for that particular piece of work to start? That's all.
If I could explain, because it's a bit more complicated than this, someone realises. It's part of a package of measures that take place. You don't procure for just one thing. So you procure for a number of things, and part of that procurement process is a specification. As part of the spec for Central Line, we say we want CCTV. And so what you don't do is a la carte when it comes to massive investment in the public transport. Safety is a big issue for us, which is why at the same time we're invested in more police officers, we're invested in the BTP, we're invested in new ways to report it, to stop it. I was one of the first people who joined the campaign by Gina Martin to outlaw upskirting, big issue for women and girls on the underground. So I'm really sorry if the member thinks the only tool in the toolkit is CCTV. It's an important part of it, which is why I've been so frustrated that no action was taken, no action at all from the previous mayor. The good news is this mayor takes public safety seriously, and so action is being taken.
Moving on, you talked about the Reported to Stop It campaign. Can you commit to giving Reported to Stop It campaign permanent ad space across the network?
We're doing more than that, Chair. We're doing more than that. Again, I'm surprised. So what we're doing is we are promoting the campaign on social media. We're promoting it on video on demand. We're promoting it on digital radio. We've got a partnership with Stylist magazine, so the campaign is far more sophisticated than the Assembly member realises. And what it's led to, I'm really pleased to say, is more confidence in reporting it. And so it's horrific that we're now seeing more examples of some of the incidents people suffer. But what that leads me to believe is there's more confidence in the reporting system, and more reporting does lead to more stopping. And going back to upskirting, we've had 4 convictions already, Chair, in relation to this new offence of upskirting. So our methods are working to make sure people are more aware about report it to stop it. I'm also always happy, Chair, to listen to ideas from backbenchers and others in relation to how we can make public transport even more safe.
When did I become a backbencher? Thank you for that. Look, in view
sorry, Chair, was that a question?
I'm just being.
If there's a question, I'm really happy to answer it.
No, it's not.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
We could have some fun.
Yeah. Have you got another question, Assembly Member?
In view of the fact that crime across the network is up 43% under your tenure, what else are you doing, particularly to pursue not only sexual assaults but all other crimes across the network?
Yeah, I've been concerned by the increase in crime and public transport across the country. The latest figures that we've seen across the national British Railways shows a 52% increase in drug possession.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, can I ask you to concentrate on London, because you are the Mayor?
Well, Chair, the question is what else we're doing. I was leading to some of the examples we're learning from other parts of the country. If someone wants to let me finish, I can address his question.
Okay.
With your permission.
No, you've got the time,
right.
Mr Mayor.
So what the national figures tell us is that we've seen a massive increase across the country in relation to crime and public transport. A 36% increase in theft, a 52% increase in drug possession on Britain's railways. What we're doing is learning lessons from across the country, but also, as he'll be aware, British Transport police the entire country. And so we contribute towards British Transport Police, and we're working with them to police around transport hubs. We've noticed, Chair, young people gather around transport hubs, and we've seen violent crime around transport hubs. So we're working with them at Police Service and the Violent Crime Task Force and other police operations, focusing around transport hubs, working with the BTP. You'll be aware, for example, that this morning it was due to the swift response of BTP that protesters breaking the law were taken off the DLR train. So it's a teamwork effort, and in my first answer gave an example of the combination of measures we're taking, from extra policing to making sure we've reversed the cuts made by the previous mayor closing ticket offices. But I'm always happy to hear ideas from all Londoners, backbenchers or others.
Assembly Member Bailey, do you have another question?
Thank you, Chair, I'm finished.
Okay. Assembly Member Prince.
Just a point of clarification, please, Mayor. Earlier you mentioned about the time it was taking to do the contracts and so on, and you said that because of power supply and so on, that it was not possible to retrofit cameras. Were you referring to the central line when you said that?
Yeah.
But didn't you just say a few minutes ago that the first set of cameras are going on the central line in the next few months?
So the question I posed, the question that was posed was, why can't you roll out CCTV earlier on existing trains? And the answer is, CCTV is being delivered as part of an integrated programme, and it's dependent on other new systems for power and operation. Unfortunately, existing train systems are unable to provide the additional power required for CCTV.
Yeah, but then you just said that you're going to fit them. You can't not retrofit and then retrofit. I'm just confused. Because
Let me try and address your confusion. So it's part of the Deep Tubes programme. There are 4 different lines: Central, Piccadilly, Bakerloo, Waterloo and City. That's the process that's taking place. As part of the Central Line programme, we will make sure that there's sufficient power and operations to power the CCTVs.
So what you were saying was that you can retrofit, but you need to increase the power supply before you can do it. Was that what you were saying?
What I'm saying is that the CCTV will happen as part of an integrated programme that will lead to power and operations to power the CCTV, and this is part of the Deep Tubes programme that I've mentioned.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it there, actually. Yeah, thank you.
Right, that's for Central Line. Then let's go to Assembly Member O'Connell's question. Are you satisfied that the Met is fit for purpose?
Our police officers do an incredible job under extremely difficult circumstances, and I want to take this opportunity to thank them all once again for what they do for our city. As Mayor, the safety of Londoners is my top priority, and I'll continue to back the Met Police Service, which is overstretched and under-resourced, so that it gets the investment and support it desperately needs from the government. This is more important now than ever before, because crime has been rising across the country, including here in London. There's been an unprecedented shift in the threat of terrorism, with London suffering 4 deadly attacks and more being thwarted. I'm told 22 in the UK since March 2017. There's been an increase in protests and disorder, with more people taking to the streets on a range of issues from climate change to Brexit, and demand is rising due to the increased complexity of crime, the systematic cuts to youth services and preventative measures. As I've stressed many times before, our brave and dedicated officers are being asked to do more and more with less and less. Of course, the new police funding announced for 2020 and 2021 by the Home Office is welcome, but this must be seen in the context of the last decade of brutal cuts to funding, which has caused so much damage, and the delay there will be in recruiting new, inexperienced officers. Against this extremely difficult background, the Met Police are doing all they can to keep Londoners safe. This view is shared by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. In terms of efficiency and legitimacy, the force was judged as good overall, and while it requires improvement in effectiveness, the Met's performance is moving in the right direction. There's always room for improvement, and the Commissioner and I agree that the Met must continue to get better and learn from any mistakes that are being made.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Hopefully you agree with me that I personally believe that the Metropolitan Police is the greatest police service, being an old school police force in the world.
Thank you for saying that.
Served by thousands of fine men and women. However, Mr Mayor, do you think that the Met's reputation has been damaged by their botched investigation in Operation Midland?
It's upsetting to say so, but I think it has. And it's because we care so much about the police service. That's why it's upsetting to say that. I think what we know is that serious errors were made, serious mistakes were made, and unfortunately, that has an impact on our reputation as a police service. And one of the things I'm keen to do, that's why I was really pleased by the Commissioner's response in welcoming the HMIC's looking at what further lessons can be learned, because we want to reassure people that the Met Police Service is a learning organisation and will learn any lessons.
Okay, thank you. Mr Mayor, you're very keen to take an invasive interest in, as we've heard earlier, the Met's quite proper interest in the ER, the withdrawal of appliance section 14. You appear not, during your tenure, to have shown any great interest in the subject that we're talking about now, Operation Midland and the Met's handling. Why is that?
Well, Operation Midland Chair began in 2014. I became Mayor in May 2016. Operation Midland ended in March 2016. I became Mayor in May 2016. As I've said, and as the Mayor at the time said, it was the right thing to commission an independent inquiry by Sir Richard Henriques. And the Henriques report says that serious errors were made. I've been quite clear. It's important that the Met learns from the investigation and that victims of rape and sexual assault feel confident to come forward and report crimes, and that all the allegations are treated seriously by the Met. And one of the reasons why I welcome the HMI, the Her Majesty's Inspectorate, looking at what future lessons can be learned is because I'm keen to make sure we learn lessons going forward.
The Home Secretary has asked for further investigation into the outcomes of Henriques' report. Do you support that?
Well, what she's asked for is for future lessons to be learned, which I support, absolutely.
Future lessons to be learned. Okay, Mr Mayor. That's fine. We've got a plenary meeting in a couple of weeks. I may continue the conversation then with yourself. Thank you very much.
Okay, Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Operation Midland is very concerning for all of us. And for once, Mr Mayor, we seem to agree on something. But what are you going to do to ensure that Lord Bramwell and his family, Lady Britton, Mr Proctor, can get justice in this case? Because it was incompetent and disgraceful inquiry. And are you going to hold the police to account to this and to support Sir Richard Henriques' call for a new criminal investigation?
Well, I think the Commission has been quite clear in relation to a number of these things. Let me try and deal with each in turn. One of those cases, there's still a civil action pursuing in relation to Mr Proctor. And as I understand it, the Met Police Service lawyers and the Commissioner is in touch with Mr Proctor, so we shouldn't talk about that particular case. In relation to any further investigations, what the Home Secretary has asked Her Majesty's Inspector to do, which the Commissioner and I fully support, is look at future lessons being learned. As I understand it, neither the Home Secretary or the current Commissioner has asked for a new criminal investigation. I appreciate that Lady Bramwell may be, according to your question. I've not seen that, but I'm quite clear in relation to what we've had. We've had the Henriques report, we've had the publication of Operation Midland, we've had the IPCC and the IPC looking into this. We've had the Met and the National Policing Practice looked at by the roundtable approach with the NPCC, CPS and College of Policing. All the recommendations for the Met have been implemented, and there's now going to be Her Majesty's Inspectorate report looking at future lessons learned. If there are any other issues that the Assembly member thinks that the Commissioner will be looking into, then of course, she can write to me or the Commissioner for us to pursue those. I'm quite clear that Her Majesty's Inspectorate is the right way to proceed, because we've already had the investigation in relation to what happened, what went wrong, and as I've accepted, as indeed has the Commissioner, serious mistakes were made, serious errors were made. It's important we learn those lessons.
You see, you've actually made much of getting a victims commissioner around. If you look at these poor people that were wrongly accused, if anybody needed a victims commissioner, they did. So surely you should be pushing for more investigation on this. Obviously, when we have the policing plenary, we are going to be asking very strong questions on this. But you are the leader of London, and supposed to be as mayor. That there is a situation here that really needs to be dug into further. Do you not think it would look better for you to be saying, no, we need to look at this. We need to see are the right people asking the questions, or are people marking their own homework?
Well, Chair, that's a criticism of the IPCC and a criticism of the IOPC, who did an exhaustive investigation. It's also a criticism of Judge Henriquez. I'm quite clear in relation to the purview of my powers, and I've seen the recommendations made by Judge Henriquez. I've also seen that the police have published in as open manner as they can Operation Midland and all that comes from that. I agree with the Home Secretary and the Commissioner. We all agree that Her Majesty's Inspectorate should be looking at what future lessons can be learned. If it's the case that the Assembly members criticising the IPCC, the IPC, Judge Henriquez, that's for her to do so, and she can do it at the plenary. I'm not doing so.
I'm actually questioning. They were supposed to be looking into 5 officers, and 4 of them they didn't even interview, but that's a separate thing. My issue is this. You are happy to go on about Brexit. You are happy endlessly to criticise the government. This is something that's happened through the Met Police. I think that this is not right. We have to hold our police to account. That is our job, and it's your job. And I'm very concerned that we have some real victims here, real victims, and they deserve justice, not just lessons learned. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
There wasn't a question there. It was just a use of their party's time.
I would have thought that we're allowed to
There
use
wasn't
our
a
time.
question. I'll move on. Can I have Assembly Member Pigeon's question, safer junctions for cyclists?
Thank you, Chair. Vision Zero is not a standard for designing a junction. Instead, it's my commitment that deaths and serious injuries will not be tolerated on our transport network. It's not a tragedy that 103 people have lost their lives so far on the roads this year, including 4 people just last week. TfL and I continue to do everything possible to eliminate deaths and serious injuries from London's transport network. Early next year, 20-mile-per-hour speed limits will be brought into effect on TfL roads in central London, and soon after, enforcement of our world-leading direct vision standard will begin. This will be on top of tripling of safe space for cycling by next spring compared to the 8 years of the previous administration, 900 buses with intelligent speed assistance, and 31 safer junctions that have been delivered so far. Over 70% of all collisions in London occur at a junction. My Safer Junctions programme is taking an evidence-based approach, targeting the 73 junctions on the TfL road network where the greatest numbers of people have been killed or injured while walking, cycling or riding motorcycles. TfL are addressing specific safety risks at each junction, but also creating a more pleasant and safe environment for walking and cycling. There has been an average reduction in collisions of nearly 30% across the Safer Junctions delivered so far. Other junctions outside this programme, such as the Old Street roundabout, which is currently under construction, also contribute to road danger reduction by separating people walking and cycling from traffic. TfL designers consider a wide range of guidance when developing junction schemes, including the Healthy Streets Check, London Cycling Design Standards, and DFT design guidance. For example, all projects undergo formal road safety audits at each stage of design and construction. TfL is of course looking at what more it can do to reduce danger on our roads. This includes looking at where the perception of road danger is highest and bringing forward more holistic schemes to tackle some of the most high-risk parts of the road network.
Thank you very much, and I welcome the initiatives you've outlined there and your Vision Zero objective. By 2041, all deaths and serious injuries should be eliminated from our transport network. But My question is, are TfL's actions today really meeting this objective? I've got here a 3,000 signature petition signed by London Cycling Campaign, handed to myself and other Assembly members today, expressing concerns about a number of recently changed junctions that have received serious investment from TfL, authorised by yourself. So do you really believe that every junction that TfL has recently invested in is meeting the standards, your ambition for Vision Zero, and they're fit for purpose?
Well, can I say, Chair, put on record, I mean, you've been extremely helpful in us reaching better standards. I'm really happy to get my team to speak with you and LCC. LCC have been fantastic as well. If you're concerned about particular junctions, you've been really helpful in the past. Please work with the team. I'm happy for you to sit down with the team. There is a real can-do attitude there. If there's any criticism about junctions that have just been installed, let us know. But genuinely, we are working incredibly hard, taking all advice from everyone to make sure that junctions are safe. Each junction is different, that's all I'd say. You can't have a checklist approach, but continue to work with us, and I'm more than happy to organise a meeting as soon as possible if there are particular junctions you're concerned about, to make sure we sort them out before they're changed. Yeah,
well, I mean, London Cycling Campaign highlight that some of the recent improvements at junctions funded by TfL, they don't believe are safe. So TfL's latest improved junctions include sites where we've seen recent fatal and serious collisions. Ludgate Circus recently seen a fatality and a serious injury. The junction at Camberwell New Road and Brixton Road has also seen a serious injury. So do you accept that junction standards by TfL need to sort of further improved and to get this right the first time? Otherwise, you're going to face expensive retrospective investment.
Well, that shouldn't be happening because, as I've said, we've seen a huge reduction in incidents where we've had the work done. There's 73 junctions earmarked for improvements. 31 are now completed. There are 43 at design construction stage. And as I said, at the design and construction phase, there's lots of road safety audits taking place in relation to those. So there may be some that aren't perfect, but they've led to massive improvements. But if it's the case that the LCC, who are fantastic in this stuff, or the Assembly member have concerns, speak to us. Some of the times it's balancing different vulnerable road users. It's not one against the other, but sometimes pedestrians take priority over cyclists, take priority over powered two-wheel mopeds and motorcycles. But we are keen to make sure we get it right. I'll just say this, a lot of the roads aren't our roads, and so it's working with a council. So there's 210 schemes that aren't ours, they're councils, meeting the council's concerns, objections, views as well. So it is a difficult exercise, but we want to get it right, and so I'm more than happy to address any concerns there may be.
Thank you. This is all about saving lives, preventing serious injuries. You've raised there the issue of London boroughs. Will you review some of the LIP payments to boroughs if their plans fall short of your Vision Zero safety standards?
Yeah, we will, and the Assembly member will know that we did so in relation to cycleways. So if you remember, a concern that you had and others had, including LCC, was question the quality of cycle schemes that are funded. So the excellent work of All Normal, we now have a clear criteria for schemes we will fund. Similarly, if it's the case that any funding we give through LIP money or other money from TfL is going to a borough scheme that doesn't meet the safety standards we want, of course we're not going to fund those. Again, if there's information that you've got, please work with us to make sure we get that right. I hope boroughs want to do the right thing. You will know there are some boroughs that are an absolute nightmare to work with and don't appear to care about pedestrians or cyclists. We want to make sure we persuade them to do the right thing.
Yeah, thank you very much. I look forward to meeting with your team and London Cycling Campaign further on some of these junctions, but we do want to strive for perfection, whether it's a TfL road or a borough road. Thank you very much, Mr.
Mayor. No. Okay, then the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Gavron, and it is specifically about the supply chains for construction and what that Brexit impact might be.
Thank you, Chair. As I and many others have long warned, a no-deal Brexit will be a disaster for home building in London. We know that the capital's home building industry, from architects designing the homes to construction workers making them a reality, relies heavily on EU nationals. We also know that the UK is particularly reliant on imported building materials, with almost two-thirds of imports being from Europe. The imposition of new tariffs, a weaker pound, and new costs and delays for goods clearing customs will cause build costs to rise and significant disruption to supply chains. But even ahead of Brexit, continued uncertainty about what will happen is already affecting the housing industry. Our Housing Association partners have reported that the value of tenders from large reputable builders have recently shot up in anticipation of our departure at the end of the month. This is due to increase in risk premiums, the cost of transport and warehousing, and in some cases a predicted shortage of labour. Reduced availability of construction materials is another factor in a toxic mix. Builders will simply down tools if schemes become undeliverable. This would undermine London's ability to meet its housing needs in the short term and would present longer-term obstacles to economic recovery. I've already made £200 million available to protect affordable home building in the face of Brexit uncertainty, and my officers will continue to work on other contingency plans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that answer. I think what you've been saying is generally reinforcing something that's not really known very much, which is how dependent we are on EU imports for our construction, for our buildings in London and for our homes in particular. And you've said that, it's about somewhere between 60 and 70% of our supplies on products and materials come from the EU. That's sort of glass, it's window frames, it's bricks, it's cement, it's steel, and it's also electrical goods and components. And I think what isn't so well known is how the EU is actually also responsible for the regulation, for the testing, and for the setting of standards on products and materials. And as you've highlighted, there will be, inevitably, whatever deal there is, and even worse, no deal, but whatever deal, there will be delays in terms of logistics, there will be tariffs, and costs will go up. So my question is, are you concerned, and what can we do about the fact that construction companies will inevitably have to seek for new supply chains outside of the EU, and they will be, I think, probably, the result of this will probably be that there will be substandard and poor quality products coming into the country.
Absolutely right. So a few things. Firstly, the bad news is developers aren't able to stockpile materials. Some are stockpiling some stuff in warehousing, but it's not possible to stockpile some of this stuff. But you raised a really important point about standards. We know when goods come from the EU that they're of a certain standard. If, for example, as members of this government are claiming, don't worry, we can import stuff from other parts of the world, question what standard will they be at? And it's a big concern that many developers and builders have. So we are working with developers. We're lobbying the government to share with us the information they've got. One of the things that we've been lobbying the government to do is to have an active industrial strategy to make up for some of the losses we may face in Brexit. And the active industrial strategy also goes towards home building and affordable home building in light of the fall in sale of market value and luxury properties as well. It could be an opportunity. The problem is if we can't get the materials, we can't have an active industrial strategy. And so we're hoping that calmer, cooler heads will prevail. There won't be a no-deal Brexit. And if we do leave the EU, there'll be a transition so we can still have goods and materials coming to our country to build the homes we so desperately need.
Thank you. I from talking to the industry, they say that it's very well known, something you've also pointed out, it's very well known what the impact of Brexit will be on the workforce. But what is not known, and in fact it seems to be an information desert, if you like, a national black hole, is anything about this issue of supply chains. And I'm thinking, apart from all the lobbying that needs to be done on the government, will you, working with industry partners, will you actually prioritise and lead on this issue and make it part of your resilience strategy?
Well, so what's sitting to your left is the chair of the London Resilience Forum, and we'll make sure we take that up in the first meeting this Monday. To give you an idea of the scale, I think like more than 90% of our timber comes from the European Union. A significant amount of our steel comes from the European Union. And you'll be aware, one of the reasons I mentioned Tilbury Docks in answer to the previous question is that's the way some of this comes. So we'll make sure it's raised at the Strategic Coordinating Group and also at the Resilience Forum. You're right, it's not just construction workers, and we are already concerned about construction workers, but also the materials is what we need for residential and commercial buildings as well.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Whittle, Extinction Rebellion.
Thank you, Chair. I declare a climate emergency in London last year and agree with the protesters' view that the government needs to stop ignoring the climate emergency and immediately deliver meaningful action. I support the democratic right to peaceful and lawful protest. However, I do not support illegal action which causes major disruption to Londoners or risks public safety. Such action is counterproductive to this crucial issue and crucial cause and puts further pressure on our already overstretched police force who need to be focused on tackling violent crime. On the 3rd of October, when the police became aware of the incident, they mobilised and arrived on the scene within 3 minutes. 8 arrests were made, with conditions imposed on them to not enter Westminster. The fire engine was also successfully seized and removed. It is not illegal to buy a used fire engine and drive it through London. However, when protesting causes disruption or breaches the peace, the Met Police have a duty to intervene, and they did so swiftly. The protests have placed an enormous burden on our police. The Deputy Commissioner has ordered officers from other parts of the Met to be redeployed to help meet the exceptional demands of this period, and most BCUs will need to move to 12-hour shifts. Removing dedicated police officers from communities will impact on neighbourhood policing. Our police resources, already stretched over years of government funding cuts, are stretched even thinner by these actions.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor, a very thorough answer. I would say that my question isn't really so much about Extinction Rebellion. It just so happens to have been that it was Extinction Rebellion. My question is that this fire engine parked for a matter of minutes outside the Treasury, right in the heart of what is known as the Golden Triangle, which you would know is the most policed area in the country. In this case, they took out, what was it, some fake red blood or whatever and sprayed it over pretty ineptly. But during that time, Mr. Mayor, they could have taken out guns, they could have shot the building up very effectively, or they could indeed have been packed with explosives or whatever. You know what I mean. I'm astonished how this was allowed to stay even for 30 seconds. That's all they needed. It is right next door. I'm sure you know it is right next door to some terrorist barriers on Birdcage Walk. I walk past it every day. How come in the most protected part of Britain this was allowed to happen? And I repeat, I'm not worried about Extinction Rebellion particularly. That could have been a massive terrorist attack.
Chair, I understand the concern and the reason why it's been raised. I don't want to sound complacent. The Met Police Service and the security services take huge steps to keep our city safe, particularly high visibility, inverted commas, targets from people. You'll appreciate that we've got, I'm afraid, a long history of being the target of terrorists, and you're right to distinguish this particular demonstration. Can I say to Chair, through you, I'll ask the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner to respond directly to specific concerns, because I'm a bit conscious about saying things in a public fora to reassure him. But can I reassure the public that the Met Police Service is the world's finest when it comes to keeping our cities safe? As I said, we've thwarted 22 terror attacks since 2017. There is real-time comms in relation to what's going on. But on this particular incident, I'm happy to get the police to respond directly to him.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. I would certainly welcome that. It has to be said again, there's that old saying, isn't there, about terror, that essentially, they can be lucky just once, we have to be lucky all the time. I would say that we were incredibly lucky on that occasion, actually, that in fact it wasn't a terrorist attack. I would say this, Mr. Mayor, as well. You said that the police were there in 3 minutes. I walked past that spot a lot in the way to Westminster. I walked past it around about 9 the following morning, still no police. No police. No one to be seen in the middle of the Golden Triangle. How can that happen?
Well, Chair, to be fair, I spent a lot of time there as well, and there are lots of highly visible police officers there.
None to be seen. Look, I've got no axe to grind in trying to lie about the police. There were none there.
Sure. If for no other reason, that's the backdoor entrance to Downing Street. And so there are police officers there regularly and stuff, but there's also real-time CCTV. But if there's a particular operational concern, and it has been raised, Chair, I'm very happy to get an answer to the question, because it's a question that comes from genuine concern. I accept that. And so can I make sure you get the briefing? But also, if there are lessons that need to be learned, the police will learn them. And so if you're raising a particular concern that you've got, I'm sure the police will look into that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And I think it is the last Brexit-related question. Oh, please.
Thank you, Chair.
And it's in the name of Assembly Member Twycross. Let's have a little bit of respect. Will you be holding more We Are Londoners events?
Yes, and I'll continue to champion and celebrate our city's diversity, doing everything I can to support European Londoners through the Brexit process. Since the referendum decision was made, I've been clear that despite Brexit, over 1 million EU citizens living in London are Londoners. They're our friends, neighbours and colleagues. They're facing the biggest change in rights and immigration status in our country for a generation. European Londoners face huge anxiety and uncertainty caused by the government's threat of a no-deal Brexit, confusion over the deadline for securing their status and the threats of deportation if they miss the deadline. As last week's official application figures show, they've been let down by a government that's not doing enough to ensure Europeans don't face a crisis akin to the Windrush scandal. We know that nearly 2 million of the UK's EU nationals and their families haven't applied for settled status. Polish nationals have the lowest uptake, despite being a large proportion of EU citizens in the UK. I'm doing everything in my power as Mayor to ensure that European Londoners can access the support and information they need to secure their rights. It's also important to recognise and celebrate their contribution to the capital. That's why we welcomed over 1,200 Londoners to City Hall last month to watch the UK's first EU settlement ceremony and to explore and enjoy European culture and music. 500 of these Londoners accessed free pro bono one-to-one legal advice on the EU settlement process. Remarkably, Tory members of the Assembly criticised me for holding this event. In March, we held the Londoners Open Community Advice Roadshow, providing free immigration advice to over 1,000 European Londoners across 10 boroughs. We also launched the EU Londoners Hub in March, which has already been accessed over 271,000 times, providing EU citizens and their families with crucial information about living in London after we leave the EU. And we're working with civil society to deliver even more direct support to vulnerable EU Londoners through a micro-grant programme, funding 15 community projects to date.
Thank you, and I would like to thank all those involved, not just in the We Are All Londoners events, but in all the events and work designed to make our EU fellow Londoners feel welcome in the city. I'll have to, on this occasion, declare a personal interest because I came with my husband, who is an EEA citizen with pre-settled status. And I was struck by how keen he was to come to the event. I mentioned it in passing to him, and he was really keen to come along. It's not often that I can be persuaded to go back into work on a Saturday without some sort of major incident being in place. But he and clearly many of those present were absolutely delighted to be here, and particularly to see his nationality and national flag represented in the displays here. I thought it was a really great event. It was actually a true celebration of Europe and European nationalities that make up a large part of the diversity of our city.
Excuse me, can I have a question?
I have got a question.
Yes, please.
And it's around the point that you made, Mr. Mayor, about the need to make sure that particular groups where there are lower levels of applications for settled status and pre-settled status, and actually particularly around those groups, and what more will be done to make sure that groups where there are lower levels of applications are encouraged and given information to apply, for example, around Polish applications.
Well, firstly, can I just say, Chair, I was really pleased that we were able to facilitate a date night for Fiona and her husband at City Hall at the We Are All Londoners event. But it's a really important point. There are some members of our community in London who may appear to be harder to reach than other members. And so what we're doing is making sure that we go out to them.
Yeah.
And the sort of groups that we're particularly concerned about are those who are Roma, rough sleepers, disabled people, non-EU nationals reliant on EU family.
Yeah.
And so we have supported some outreach work from various projects in London, communities that know those communities best. Some of these communities won't access the online service we have, and so we'll be doing more of that. And the thing that causes me alarm is we had one of the most senior members of government last week saying, if EU citizens haven't signed up for secured status by the end of next year, they could be deported. And that's causing real alarm amongst Londoners, and these are Londoners, by the way, who are EU citizens. That's why we are redoubling our efforts to reach them. My worry is many of the people may disappear, may be worried about being deported, they may misunderstand what was said. So any advice or assistance that you have or others have, I'm more than happy to hear the advice.
I think that you mentioned the Home Office Minister Brandon Lewis comments about deporting EU citizens that haven't applied for pre-settled or settled status before the deadline. Are you concerned that government hasn't learnt from the Windrush scandal?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I still meet now people who are affected by the Windrush scandal, and it was a scandal and a disgrace. But my point is this, put aside the Windrush scandal, we know Home Office, UKBA, IND, the authorities aren't the most efficient in the world. Right. And if just 1 in 10 hasn't registered, for whatever reason, in London that's more than 100,000, around the country it's more than 330,000. These are, for all intents and purposes, Londoners and Brits. And I think it's really important before the government is talking about draconian consequences, being confident that there are systems in place to do it efficiently and properly. And I'm not sure if they spent enough time educating the public, making them aware, and I'm not sure the fact that you can't, for example, register using an iPhone, that already reduces the numbers of people who haven't got a computer who can register. And I think the government's going to do much, much more to get the registration rates much higher, bearing in mind we now know the consequences of not being registered.
Thank you. And would you pass on thanks to all those concerned?
I'll make sure I do. Thank you. Thanks for your kind comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Desai.
Mr. Mayor, the message, we are all Londoners, is of course of much wider resonance than just for aimed at EU citizens, who we of course value very much. It's about how we keep Londoners united in these very challenging, uncertain times, and where people like Neil Basu, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner, has warned about extremist forces, particularly far-right extremists, that is very worried about causing divisions in our communities and in society. This is National Hate Crime Awareness Week as well, of course, and after what we saw in Bulgaria, which the chair of the FA very rightly condemned and said that we should look at what's going on in our own country as well. The police committee launched a report around hate crime in the capital on September the 30th, and you have been asked to consider findings and respond to us by the end of October. In particular, there are 3 relevant findings which I would ask you to comment upon, or at least give us your initial views. We asked you to hold an annual London event to raise awareness of hate crime, increase community cohesion, and celebrate London's diversity. Can I encourage you to positively give some thought to this proposal? Your predecessor, but one, had an annual Rise Festival, some of which I attended. Your predecessor scrapped it. So that's the first point. We also made a proposal asking you to renew your commitment to initiatives like London is Open, in particular the use of social media in this campaign. Do you think that this campaign needs to be revamped? And in particular, how we use social media much more effectively? And thirdly, lastly, we asked you to work more proactively with organizations such as sporting and cultural institutions to encourage them to promote awareness of hate crime. Again, will you give serious thought to this proposal? I've done known several of London professional clubs, which will be extended to non-league clubs and other institutions, cultural, sporting. One or two clubs are doing some great work, some clubs are doing some work, one or two are just smug.
I heard 3 questions there, I think.
And tomorrow is also
I think enough. Assemblymember Desai, can we just have the answers to... I think I heard 3 questions at the end.
Plus one.
I'll be very quick. Can I just say, Chair, because Londoners may not know this, but I remember Unmesh Desai taking on the NF in the 1980s.
He did.
And he has a long record of taking on fascists and racists, and he deserves our praise for the work he's done over many decades, and he's been a mentor and role model to me around anti-racism. Show racism the red card and wear red tomorrow is really important, and of course I'll be trying to wear red tomorrow. It's my favourite colour, so it's not difficult for me to do so. And so it's really important that we recognise that actually, although yes, of course, we condemn unequivocally what happened in Bulgaria, we've got to get our own house in order. It's really important that we do so as well. I'll respond fully to the really good report done by the committee and the Assembly. Really important points raised there. At the moment, our London is Open campaign will go towards London is Open for businesses, bearing in mind we're worried about the consequences of EU. But you're right to remind us that we need to give London a sense of belonging. And it's about giving people a sense of belonging. And we will work with the Assembly to see how we can do that. And I'll, Chair, be responding formally to the report in due course.
Question on the violence reduction unit has been withdrawn, so we go straight to the question from Assembly Member Arnold, which relates to Black History Month.
Thank you, Chair. It's unacceptable, Deputy Chair. It's unacceptable that a person's family background can have an impact on their employment opportunities. I'm determined to do all I can to make London's labour market more accessible and fair for everyone. There are high rates of graduate unemployment and underemployment for Black Londoners. We also know there are challenges that minority ethnic Londoners experience when trying to enter and progress in the labour market. These issues need to be tackled on multiple levels with targeted action. Through our Good Work Standard, we're supporting employers to ensure their recruitment practices give all potential employees a fair chance and to monitor and take action to close their ethnicity pay gap. We've led by example on this at the GLA, publishing and acting on our own pay gap data. We've launched the Workforce Integration Network, WIN, to specifically focus on the underrepresentation of young Black men in the workforce who we know have one of the biggest employment gaps. This currently focuses on supporting our digital and construction sector to be more inclusive employers and is an important part in changing workplace cultures. I'm also working with higher education institutions to improve access, progression and retention levels for students from minority ethnic backgrounds. I've recently commissioned, Deputy Chair, further research into the specific issue raised by the Chair, Assembly Member Arnold, to better understand inequalities in degree classification and transitions to employment after higher education. We hope to report on this in spring 2020. The steps before education and training are also essential. Without existing social and professional networks, it can be much harder for young Londoners to figure out their career paths, and that's why we've expanded the Head Start programme to help bridge the gap between schools and employment.
Thank you for that. 2 days ago, I was with some Black elders, many of whom were part of the Windrush generation, and we're having a conversation. And the first thing they said to me was to feed back to you how they welcomed your mayoralty. So I'll pass that on their behalf. But it was also saddened. I was also saddened when I asked them what that was one of their biggest disappointments, and that was what they told me was that their grandchildren were still having to face the sorts of insidious forms of racism that they had faced and they had challenged, and they were hoping that in 2019 their grandchildren would be in a better place. And when you look at the 2016 survey that was done by ECU, it's clear that on many of our university campuses, racism is commonplace. When you meet the higher education principals, will this be at the top of your agenda?
First of all, thank you for your comments and your question. It will be. Can I just say this? And the elders will have said this to you, I'm sure. My experience is some of the language that you and I experienced in our younger years, we thought had disappeared from the English language. It's returned.
Yes.
And that's why we must always be complacent and always vigilant about racism. And so the P word, the N word, the Y word, we thought had disappeared from the English language. It's now being used again. There's been a spike in hate crime, but also it affects attitudes. And there can be unconscious bias in recruitment practices, universities and places of work, but also in how people are treated. And one of the reasons why we introduced last year Debbie Weeks-Bernard at the slavery commemoration event was to understand the legacy of not just slavery, but some of the consequences of how the British Empire was resolved, and you talked about the Windrush generation. And so we've got to be live to this. The institutional racism that exists in all major institutions, and so we're conscious of this, can I reassure you. And whenever our conversation, not just with universities and FE colleges, but also with employers, I'm keen to remind them that we should see ourselves as a beacon for the rest of the world, and that includes in relation to discrimination, direct and indirect, and I'm always vigilant, but also can I reassure you, in conversations I have with, it could be CEOs, it could be global CEOs, it could be vice-chancellors, I talk about all Londoners having the opportunities and that helping hand that you and I had.
Thank you very much. And can you let me know in writing how you're getting on with the project that the Wind Initiative that has supported 200 young Black men into employment opportunities. I would welcome that in writing. Please.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Next question is from Assembly Member Russell and relates to affordable fares.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. In the 8 years before I became Mayor, TfL fares went up by more than 42%. Londoners were paying some of the highest public transport fares of any major city. I made a pledge to freeze London transport fares for 4 years, paid for by making TfL more efficient and exploring new revenue-raising opportunities. Since I became Mayor, all fares set by TfL have been frozen. To put this into perspective, the overall increase in national rail fares over the last 4 years is around 8.8%. In January, national rail fares will rise again by up to 2.8%. The introduction of the hopper fare, which enables passengers to make unlimited bus and tram journeys for the price of one within the hour, has also made travel more affordable to millions of Londoners. Since its introduction, the hopper has saved customers money on over 368 million bus journeys, with more than 450,000 bus and tram journeys made every day using the hopper fare. The hopper fare is benefiting people on lower incomes the most, including those living in outer London, who often have to make long and complex journeys to work as they can't afford to live in central London. I've also protected a range of travel concessions, which is an important part of providing affordable travel in London and ensuring that everyone can participate in the life of our city. I'm proud of what we've achieved to make transport more affordable. TfL is providing a vital service to Londoners, and the policies we've delivered since 2016 are helping to provide a way of life for Londoners to create new opportunities to reach their potential, whoever they are and whatever their circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hopper fares and frozen singles aren't any good if you're living in outer London and rely on a travel card that's actually gone up every year since you've been Mayor. Will you do anything to make travel cards affordable?
Well, we've revisited this. We're revisiting an issue that I've talked about in the past. So the way the travel card works is an arrangement between central government, DfT, and train operating companies. I've got no locus to renegotiate that deal between DfT and the TOCs. What I've been saying to the government is if I can manage to freeze TfL fares, why can't you? Bearing in mind these TOCs make massive profits at the expense of commuters who receive a bad service, delays, cancellations, huge prices. And my message to the government is, if I can do it, why can't you?
Thank you. The last figures that I've seen show that actually 1 in 4 journeys are made using a travel card, so it is a really significant issue. Now, if you can't reduce fares for everyone, how about doing it for nurses? There are some key workers, like the police, who are given discounts or free travel. So why not extend these discounts to other key workers like nurses?
We've looked at the issue of key workers and the Assembly will be aware we've got a huge range of concessions we already give. Some of the people, the nurses that have been talked about, may be eligible for the other concessions. One of the biggest obstacles to the reduced travel, subsidised travel, free travel is definition. How does one define a key worker? For many people, a key worker also includes cleaners, porters, planners, some of the staff who work for, dare I say it, you. And so if radiographers, those others who work in hospitals, and so there's a real issue with definition. That's why our fares freeze is so useful to all Londoners who use public transport, particularly those poorer Londoners who live in outer London who have to use buses. The hopper fare has been used by a huge number of Londoners. My ability to freeze fares would be far greater if the government hadn't cut our operating grant by £700 million a year. So, one thing that would really help me is lobbying the government, not just in relation to getting TOCs to freeze their fares, but also in relation to a decent operating revenue settlement as well.
Yeah, no, we can agree on that. Earlier this year, I found that 20% of people felt forced to own a car in London. In much of London, car ownership is still rising. Wouldn't a measure of a successful fares freeze be more people using public transport rather than cars?
Well, we have in London every day more than 5 million people using the tube, more than 6 million people using our buses. Around the country, there's been a massive dip in people using public transport, people using buses. We've not seen that in London. One of the reasons is because of my fares freeze. Another reason is because our public transport is very good, affordable, accessible and safe. We've got to carry on investing in that. But it's made really difficult with no operating grant. The good news in relation to car usage is that as a consequence of my ultra-low emission zone, brought in this year, opposed by the Conservatives, we've seen fewer non-compliant vehicles coming into central London, more compliant vehicles being used and air quality being improved. A good example of a policy good for the air, good for more people using public transport, opposed by the Tories.
The former mayor, Ken Livingstone, had a 70p bus fare which massively boosted bus use. Do you think you're being radical enough with fares?
The former mayor had a brilliant Labour government. If I had a brilliant Labour government, I could do much more. I've got an awful Tory government. And so it's really important that we do our best to make sure wherever the general election comes, we kick them out, get a decent Labour government, and get some policies that help. So I've got somebody who's trying to be an MP. I've got somebody trying to be an MP. Chair, can I just say, I hope I get on with Joe Johnson's successor as well as I get on with Joe Johnson. So what's important, though, is to have a good, radical government helping a good mayor doing good things for Londoners.
Well, Mr Mayor, I'm totally out of time, but yes, it'd be lovely to have a Green government.
Okay, that's it. Next question is from Assembly Member Devonish and relates to Hammersmith Bridge.
Are you also going for a seat, or is it just Gareth?
I love working with you here.
Great. Deputy Chair, Transport for London is working with and on behalf of Hammersmith and Fulham Council to reopen the bridge to motorised traffic as soon as possible. As the Council announced at the end of the summer, the work is currently expected to take around 3 years. TfL has allocated £25 million to ensure that design work began straight away and to allow some vital preliminary works to take place in the coming months. Hammersmith Bridge is an iconic and historic London landmark, and repairing it will be technically challenging. The bridge's complex construction, Grade 2 star listing and its materials, iron and timber, all restrict the repair options. On top of this, there are numerous other considerations, including maintaining an accessible walking and cycling crossing and a navigable river. While refurbishing the bridge involves considerable technical unknowns and risks, TfL is exploring every possible way of completing the work as safely and efficiently as possible. This includes installing a temporary foot and cycle bridge which would allow work on the bridge to proceed uninterrupted while ensuring people can still walk and cycle across the river here. TfL and the Council are currently reviewing the feasibility and the costs of the temporary bridge and will be in position to make a decision in the coming months. The design for the full repair of the bridge is being developed in parallel. As I've already said, some important preliminary works will take place in the next few months. This will stabilise areas of high stress in the bridge, including the areas where the micro fractures were found earlier this year. This stabilisation work will allow the heavier repair works to be safely carried out when the design is ready. My Deputy Mayor for Transport and TfL are in contact with the DfT, Heritage England and the Bridge Estates Trust seeking their support for getting the bridge renovated and reopened as quickly as possible. They'll also continue working closely with the Council to identify funding for the overall works so that a contract for this can be let next spring. In the meantime, TfL is doing everything possible to minimise the impact of the closure of the bridge, including making changes to the local bus network and providing an enhanced dial-ride facility to improve links for people affected by the closure.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, are you aware that the marine engineering company Beckett Rankin has proposed a £5 million temporary bridge that could be built in just 3 months and could run parallel to the existing bridge? How seriously are you taking this proposal?
I saw the article. I saw the article in the magazine earlier this week, and I'm sure this will be considered by those looking at the works that have been done. So I'll double check and make sure they've got this, but I'm sure they have, because if I've seen it, I'm sure the engineers have as well.
Could you please ask that the Deputy Mayor responds before the next mayoral question on this, because clearly we can't wait until November 22 just to open the existing bridge. We've got to do something to actually improve things for our residents.
Chair, can I suggest that I get TfL to respond on the merits of this application directly to the Assembly member, but every stone is being looked under to see if there are options we can pursue, and so nothing has been ruled out. I can't comment on the technical feasibility of this particular scheme. I'll make sure someone from TfL does respond to the Assembly member.
Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Twycross, Deprivation in London.
Thank you. The indices still show there are still too many Londoners feeling the effects of deprivation and poverty, and issues like housing affordability and air quality remain big challenges. The latest release broadly shows that overall Londoners are a smaller proportion of England's most deprived neighbourhoods compared to the last set of data published in 2015. However, there is no room for complacency, and there is much more to be done. We've also got to be cautious in how we interpret this information. Much of the data behind the release was collected in 2015-16. The full effects of the government's damaging welfare reforms were introduced in 2016, many of which have had a negative impact on Londoners, which have not been captured. The research my team at City Hall published in July shows the impact of these reforms will push an extra 100,000 Londoners, including 75,000 children, into poverty by 2021-2022. The research also shows that reforms of the past 4 years, like the benefits freeze and the 2-child limit, have significantly cut the threshold incomes of some of the most disadvantaged Londoners. As we know from other sources, that universal credit has contributed to an increase in rent arrears and food bank use. The results of the new survey of Londoners, which was published in June, show that a staggering 1.5 million adults and 400,000 children in London are living in situations of low or very low food security.
Thank you. I agree that we really can't be complacent, and I wondered if you could comment on how important London Challenge Poverty Week is in continuing to highlight the issues and contribute to eradicating poverty in London.
Well, actually, the summit's taking place now as we speak, and I'm sure if I wasn't here, I'd be addressing the summit taking place. It's really important. It raises awareness of the inequalities taking place, but also celebrates the work being done by partners to address this, and it shows how we can tackle poverty. One of the things that Debbie Weeks-Bernard, who's addressing the summit on my behalf, the event will be saying is the fruits of the work we did with Child Poverty Action in July, which shows that in the first 5 weeks of the project, which is putting advisors on welfare rights in primary schools, the pilot increased the incomes of these families in this one primary school by almost £50,000 combined. So it shows with the right advice how we can really take steps to address some of the poverty Londoners are facing.
Thank you. And how is your research and your economic fairness team looking at the reasons behind deprivation so that we can find real solutions to poverty in London?
We've already looked at some of this, and that's one of the reasons why I talked about welfare benefit changes from the government. It is a reality that actually the welfare benefit changes has driven more people into poverty. I am concerned that if we get the wrong sort of exit from the EU, all exits are bad for us, but the wrong sort of exit, it will accelerate some people being driven to poverty. One of the things we're doing is working with employers to get more employers to pay the London living wage. I'm really pleased that we've more than doubled since I became mayor, the numbers of employers paying the London living wage. So we're doing a whole host of work in relation to the causes of poverty, the drivers of poverty, but also what can be the drivers to get people out of poverty as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Gavron.
Yes, just on the back of that question, I'd like to raise an issue. Some of the poorest children and most deprived communities live in areas with very, very high levels of toxic air pollution. And in that context, I'd just like to say that last week at the International Climate Summit led by C40 cities, awards were given to cities, 7 different categories of awards, and internationally, and the only city that got, in Europe that got an award was London, and it received it for its work on air quality. So I would like to ask you to accept mine and I hope our congratulations for all the work that's been done on ULEZ, and it was ULEZ that was particularly mentioned, and also to pass on to Shirley Rodriguez and her team, and to Heidi Allen and her team, thanks for all their work.
Well, Chair, can I thank the Assembly Member for her kind words about the amazing work that the team at City Hall have done with TfL and others. We have the boldest and most comprehensive plans to address air quality of any city in the world, but this is an issue of social justice. It's the poorest Londoners who own the fewest cars that suffer the worst air quality. And that's why I don't apologise for bringing the ULEZ in this April, opposed by the Conservatives. Notwithstanding their opposition, we brought it in, and I'm hoping that you'll see over the course of the next few days further research showing the progress we're making on some of the consequences of us being brave with this policy, helping the poorest Londoners address the issues of poor quality air.
Good.
Thank you. Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Bacon, supporting businesses.
Well, Chair, I hope it's not the last question he asks as an Assembly Member. I've enjoyed our tussles, and I'm hoping even if he's selected as a candidate, he comes back to next Mayor's question time to ask a question next month as well. I'm extremely proud of my record on supporting London's businesses, notwithstanding the huge uncertainty and other challenges around Brexit and the government's handling of this. Since my mayoralty, London's economy has gone from strength to strength. London's economic output has increased by 6.1%, and there's been an increase of 295,000 jobs, and employment has fallen from 6% to 4.6%. 2 years ago, I launched the London Growth Hub, a one-stop shop which delivers online and face-to-face business support. To date, the hub has supported over 4,000 micro-businesses, social enterprises and SMEs through its events and support programmes. Over 700 businesses from across London have attended our roadshows, and last week I welcomed 200 businesses to City Hall, where I announced the Growth Hub will be opening 5 physical sites in Vauxhall, Hammersmith, Woolwich, Croydon and Tottenham. Following the success of the London Co-Investment Fund, which under my mayoralty has become one of the most diverse funds, 20% of co-founders of the portfolio companies are BAME, and 22% have female co-founders, which is significantly more than the UK average of 9%. I launched my Greater London Investment Fund in May this year, the largest of its kind ever created by City Hall. The £100 million fund will support over 170 companies and create 3,500 jobs in London over its lifetime. Last year, my Deputy Mayor for Business, Rajesh Agrawal, hosted roundtables with minority ethnic women and disabled entrepreneurs and business owners who can face particular barriers in business. In response to issues they highlighted, I've established a new programme designed to help these Londoners access entrepreneurship and improve enterprise skills. Through London and Partners, the Business Growth Programme provides bespoke business support to tech and creative SMEs in London, such as mentoring and courses on access to finance and marketing, and the Mayor's International Business Programme assists scale-ups in London to go global. The programme has supported more than 801 companies and has created over 1,573 jobs, secured £193 million in export wins and generated £486 million in investment. I think you'll agree, Chair, all these are things to be proud of.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I want to focus on one particular business, and the reason is because activities by one of the GLA family group are posing an existential threat to that business. I want to get your thoughts on it. In February of this year, in the Architects Journal, car giants were quoted talking about the OPDC's scheme for regeneration in the west of London. And car giant's managing director Tony Mendes is quoted as saying, in just 4 years, the OPDC has already spent £30 million of public money, and we are gravely concerned that it is now seeking £250 million more, even though the comprehensive development of the area is currently unviable, unaffordable and undeliverable. In response to that, a spokesman from your office said that you were extremely disappointed by car giant's approach, and the spokesman then went on to say, these comments are barely worth the paper they are written on before accusing them of having private sector vested interests. Is that a response that you stand by?
Well, I stand by what happened at the inspectorate and the response we took at the inquiry.
Sorry, could you say that again?
We stand by the stance we took at the inquiry and the evidence we gave at the inquiry.
I'm asking you about the response that was given in your name. Do you stand by that?
I can't remember the press spokesperson quote. As you'll appreciate, we give out dozens each week.
Okay. So you aren't accusing them of having private sector vested interests, and you acknowledge that the comments that they have are worth the paper that they're written on?
I take the views of all Londoners seriously, and I don't distinguish between those who are business people and those that aren't. I can't comment on that particular quote because I just don't remember it.
Because the point, of course, is about the inspector you've just commented on. On the 17th of September, the planning inspector drove a coach and horses through the OPDC's plans for the area and instructed that Site 1A, which would have taken 25% of car giant's land, be removed from the plan because it is unviable and cannot be delivered. So in that light, would you like to withdraw those comments that were issued in your name?
Chair, as I've said, I simply don't know the comments that have been talked about. I don't accuse the member of inaccurately reporting the comments, I just don't remember them.
Okay, that's fine, I can send it to you. Where I'm really going with this, Mr. Mayor, is that, of course, Car Giant is a wealth creator. They turn over £500 million a year and they employ 2,000 people, many of whom are sourced locally. And their business was threatened with extinction because of the development plans of the OPDC. Now, the relationship between the OPDC and Car Giant has broken down completely. We have seen documentation where Car Giant are repeatedly offering visits to the OPDC board, and the OPDC board are repeatedly refusing. For this entire scheme, which is now in jeopardy, to be resurrected, relationships between Car Giant and OPDC need to be rebuilt. So in that light, Mr. Mayor, in order to retrieve the situation, will you direct the interim chief executive of the OPDC to instruct the board to meet Car Giant?
Well, I'm due to meet the chair of the OPDC shortly, so I'll be raising with the chair the comments raised by the Assembly member and discussing them with her. And I'm happy to write to the Assembly member once I've met with the chair in relation to what steps will be taken.
Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anyone else? No? Okay, next question is in the name of Assembly Member Copley, social housing demolitions.
Thank you, Chair. Protecting and increasing in social housing is critical to solving London's housing crisis, but far too often plans for estate regeneration have included a loss of social housing, and landlords have simply not earned their residents' trust. As Mayor, I've used all the powers available to me to change this. At the heart of my approach is my Good Practice Guide to Estate Regeneration published last year. This guide is the country's first and reflects policies in my draft London plan requiring any social housing to be replaced, like for like, with an increase in affordable housing wherever possible. It also introduced my new approach, which requires projects wanting GLA funding to demonstrate resident support through a positive ballot. I've been encouraged over the last year to see at least 6 ballots have taken place, all of which have been positive, and that councils and housing associations have largely embraced my approach. However, I was very concerned to hear recently that Westminster Council is planning to demolish a social housing at Ebury Bridge through permitted development rights, rather than have their full regeneration plans go through the scrutiny of a planning application. I've no jurisdiction over permitted development approval, but I've asked my team to look into this urgently. In the approach they are taking, Westminster Council seem quite blatantly to be trying to avoid City Hall's and indeed the public scrutiny of their plans. What's more, as they haven't applied on this scheme for GLA funding towards the replacement homes in the scheme, it means they also appear to be avoiding scrutiny from residents by dodging the ballot requirement. Westminster Council should be ashamed of these shoddy tactics. They make clear the pitfalls of national permitted development legislation and also the importance of a Labour government making ballots a requirement for all estate regeneration schemes, whether or not they receive funding from City Hall. I would urge Westminster Council to do the right thing now, be upfront about your plans, let them be subjected to full scrutiny, and crucially, give residents the final say.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Mayor, and I of course welcome your requirement within the Estate Regeneration Good Practice Guide for ballots on estate regeneration schemes involving demolition. Indeed, it was something the Assembly unanimously called on you to do, so that's very, very welcome. With regard to Westminster Council, I've written to Nikki Aiken, the leader, about this particular issue. You mentioned that your officials have been looking into this. Are you aware of any powers that exist, whether they're your powers or whether there's any ability to appeal Westminster Council's decision to grant itself planning permission under permitted development rights to knock down these buildings?
Well, my officers are looking into this. You'll appreciate it'd be unwise for me to telegraph my intentions if it is the case that we go down the particular route you're suggesting. What I'm clear about is this appears to be an example of a council looking for any loophole they can to avoid allowing residents to have a say on a scheme. I'm not quite clear what the council is scared of, giving residents a voice. And so we'll be looking at this particular scheme, looking at what we can do to address this. But it demonstrates actually a council not being on the side of their residents and being scared of allowing the residents to have a say.
I mean, the rules, the particular piece of legislation which they're using in order to demolish these buildings, apparently there is a condition that is not allowed if the owner of the buildings has allowed them to deteriorate, and it seems quite clear that that's what Westminster Council have done through moving the residents out, allowing the buildings to fall into disrepair. I mean, do you think there could be potential for residents or the community to judicially review the council's decision?
Well, Chair, as you will know, I always am receptive to good ideas from the Assembly member, and he often presents good ideas in this forum. As I said to him, my office is looking at all of possibilities and all possible routes to try and address what is clearly an attempt by this council to circumvent guidelines and the guide that we have. And more importantly, for me, I'm hoping Westminster residents are aware of what their council is doing in their name.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly... Sorry?
I thought it was me again.
Yes, it is you. It is you, Assembly Member Copley.
Thanks, Chair.
Household at risk of homelessness.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. These figures confirm the shocking impact of the government's failure to build enough social housing, their cuts to the welfare system and the lack of action to ensure people earn decent pay. As it's become harder to buy a home or get a social tenancy, more and more Londoners are being forced to rent privately. Rents have spiralled, and with wages stagnant, the number of private tenants in London in work and on housing benefit has more than doubled to over 100,000 over the past 10 years. In 2009, only 26% of private renters received housing benefit were in work. Now it's 59%. The government's savage cuts to the benefits to help cover private rents have led to a huge increase in renters losing their homes, and this accounts for a bulk of increase in homelessness in the capital in recent years. We need the government to change course, but in the meantime we're doing a number of things in London to help. We're promoting the London Living Wage through My Good Work Standard, and we're also, through the adult education budget, helping those who earn less than living wage be eligible for training courses to help them progress. Second, we're building record numbers of new council social rented and other genuinely affordable homes. And third, we're pressing the government to reverse welfare reforms, which have made it so difficult for Londoners on low incomes to secure and sustain homes. The government urgently needs to bring benefits back into line with rents, overall the private rented sector, and give London City Hall and the councils the investment and powers we need to build the council, social rented and other genuinely affordable homes Londoners so desperately need.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Last week, Generation Rent released data showing that private renters in England are losing out on about £70 million a year when landlords kick them out, in terms of as missed time at work, cleaning bills and moving costs stack up to around £1,400 each on average. I've written to the Secretary of State to urge him to follow up on the promise which was made by the Prime Minister's predecessor to end Section 21 no-fault evictions. But do you think this is a move that would help Londoners struggling private renters, or do you agree with members of the Conservative group that it's just a cheap stunt?
Well, I was astonished when they said that, because they clearly aren't in tune with Londoners who have to rent privately. You were a big part of the campaign to get the government to abolish the fees tenants pay to letting agents, which they did last year. And that's because we saw tenants paying huge fees when they move into new tenancies, and letting agents being incentivised to have shorter contracts and change the contracts and flip to get a fee from it. Similarly, Section 29 leads to big problems because we know that tenants haven't got security. They can be turfed out for no good reason and have to pay the cost that you've alluded to. The government said previously that they were going to end Section 21 evictions. They were consulting on this, and I'm concerned that delay leads to them changing their mind. It's not a stunt. It will hugely improve the quality of life for tenants, and the sooner that happens, the better.
Thank you. Yes, and I agree, and I've experienced this myself, where one flat I was living in, every year you'd be served a Section 21 eviction and then told what the next year's rent was going to be, and take it or leave it. And I don't think that's a particularly good way to be treating private tenants. And do you think it's important, as well as abolishing Section 21, we need a package of measures for private tenants who, let's remember, are living in the most insecure parts of the housing market? And that should also include things like open-ended tenancies and the package of rent control that you've been advocating, but which would require the government to devolve the powers to City Hall in order for you to implement.
Absolutely. I mean, there's two parts of the equation in simple terms. One is to have genuine security of tenure, and two is to have affordable and predictable rents. And what the government needs to do is, rather than this sort of piecemeal approach towards the private rental market, abolishing letting agents' fees, hopefully getting rid of Section 21 evictions, for them to look at the whole private rented sector, it simply won't be possible in the short to medium term to build the homes we need to address the housing crisis. And in the meantime, they should address the issue of the exorbitant cost of renting in London. One way of doing that would be to look at the London model we've worked out, work with the government, set up the commission, and we can get going so we can get in London rents not going up hugely as they've been doing, but then being stabilised and then going down.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair. County lines is a vile practice involving criminal networks who groom and coerce young people to supply drugs and fuel violence. The groundbreaking rescue and response programme, backed with £3 million of City Hall investment, provides support to as many of those affected as possible. The programme is in partnership with London boroughs and charities, St Giles Trust, Safer London and Abianda. Their research work uncovered the devastating scale of the problem, finding that more than 4,000 young people are involved in lines operating out of London. Response and rescue is part of our action to do everything possible to support those entrapped. In the first year alone, 568 young people were referred, 243 of those were offered an intervention, and 130 received support. This includes a rescue service which provides one-to-one support when people return home. There's a wide range of additional interventions funded through City Hall to help vulnerable young people. These include London Gang Exit and Empower, funding youth workers in London A&Es and major trauma centres to help victims of knife crime, and my £45 million Young Londoners Fund, which has allowed over 73,000 young Londoners access to positive activities. Alongside preventative work, the Met Police continues to tackle those that are being exploited by others. We've also got interventions like Operation Raptor, which has led to gang members being jailed for more than 61 years, and the use of modern slavery legislation to secure human trafficking convictions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned the work of Abianda, and from the figures you quoted, just under 100 young women received support. And obviously, we need to make sure that we're offering these young women enough support. How are you working with Abianda and other groups to make sure that there's good practice in making sure we are getting young girls referred to the service, is identified and replicated elsewhere?
Yeah, firstly, I think we've got to just accept we're barely scratching the surface. You know, there are more than 4,000 young people as young as 11 involved in county lines, and so we've got the country's first response to this in the scheme that we're funding, the Rescue and Response scheme. About 15% of the county lines originates from London, but imagine the rest coming from the rest of the country. So Abianda are doing some brilliant work targeted towards young women affected by gangs. They give one-to-one specialist support, and the good news is the people they help don't go back to county lines. What we also know, I'm afraid, is these organised criminals and gangs are targeting vulnerable people outside food outlets, schools, pupil referral units, youth clubs where they exist, and so we've got to make sure we deal at source as well to stop vulnerable people, including girls, being targeted.
And obviously the Rescue and Response is a great initiative, but the fact is it's already at full capacity. The data analysis from Rescue and Response records that 441 young women may also be involved in county lines. There's a waiting list of almost 2 years. How are we going to ensure that those young women who need the support at the early stages of grooming are going to get that support?
It's really upsetting. I mean, during the course of the year, this is the country's first scheme. We were told they're at capacity and at a waiting list. So in year, we gave them more support, more money to provide more support. But they're stretched, and that's why we need the government to, reverse the cuts made over the last 9 years, not just to the police, but preventative services as well. If we can deal at source with these issues, we don't need to spend the money in enforcement later on. So there's an economic argument to invest in preventive measures, as well as a moral argument and social argument as well. We will do what we can at City Hall, but it feels like we've got one hand tied behind our back because of government cuts.
And there's a big issue on government cuts, and obviously working in partnership with other forces across the country is a key issue. So the research from MOPAC shows that young people are travelling across the country, meaning that we have to access the data from other forces. How are the Met working with those other forces and making sure that they're confident in identifying some of the young people who've been trafficked from London? Young people from my part of, Lambeth and Southwark who have been found in, as far as Birmingham, Peterborough. How are we going to make sure that the Met are working with those other forces?
So we've got young people, also vulnerable adults, being targeted as well, and so there's now been set up through the NCA, the National Crime Agency, a county lines coordination centre, and the Met Police have a lead role in relation to that because of our expertise, and so there's better coordination. The problem is the response can't just be a policing response, because you just think about the additional needs of a young person or vulnerable person: social services, housing, family networks, moving away from organised criminals and stuff. And so with the massive cuts in public services, it's very difficult often for hard-worked, hard-pressed police to provide the additional support. And so it is tough. I don't want to pretend it's easy and stuff, but we are trying our best to coordinate. But as I said before, and I don't use these words lightly, we are scratching the surface.
And just finally, Mr. Mayor, I quoted some of those figures, but they are quite low. Are you concerned that the low number of girls identified as county lines mean that essentially criminals are continuing to use girls to operate where they may likely avoid, suspicion?
Oh yeah. What's happened is it's quite clear what's happened is as the police have targeted organised criminals and gang members, young men, older boys, they're moving to others to be mules and supply drugs. Girls, vulnerable adults, taking over people's homes, and so we've got to be innovative and evolve our ways of addressing that as well. The key thing is, though, is we need to stop people getting involved in this in the first place, target those who are targeting vulnerable young people, but also deal with the enforcement side as well. And so, we've got to be innovative in how we respond to organised criminals changing the way they operate.
Thank you. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We're at that point where, can I ask the Assembly to agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9B in accordance with the provision of Standing Order 1.18 in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Agreed. Next question from Assembly Member Devonish. Tube noise.
Chair, I know time is short, so I'll write a longer response to him, but can I allow him to ask his supplementary question in relation to tube noise?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and thank the Deputy Mayor for what work she's been doing. We have had a step change from TfL in recent months, but I was very concerned with the Ham and High article the 9th of October, where our RMT source was quoted as saying they may be taking away the track fastening Pandrel Vanguard that has been so helpful. And I won't ask you to answer that question now, but could you write to me and tell me whether or not they are going to remove that? It will be a disaster for certain lines when actually progress has been made in recent months. So please don't take away that very useful product.
Chair, can I agree for you to write to the Assembly member? Tube noise is causing real misery to many of his constituents, and he's concerned about the consequences of the point made. I'll write to him, and also shall I copy in? I'll copy all the Assembly in relation to the answer, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Disnall.
Line stretches where residents were badly affected by noise, and I'm already getting complaints that the noise levels are horrendous for people who live nearby. So whilst that may have been the benefit of the drivers, which I don't object to, and passengers who may experience it for a very short period, the impact on residents has been horrific. So TfL really do need to start to get to grips with this issue, not simply say, oh, there's no solution that we can think of at the moment. It is a very serious issue. If you add in the number of complaints I've had altogether, they're running to 3 figures. And TfL are simply not taking this seriously.
Well, Chair, it's a well-made point. The Deputy Mayor does take it seriously, as indeed does TfL. I'll make sure that point's also responded to in the letter I sent to Tony Devonish.
Thank you for that. Assembly Member McCartney, question on government funding for London.
Thank you, Chair. Additional police officers for London are welcome, but this funding represents only a very partial reversal of the huge government cuts to the Met Police since 2010. I've been clear that London needs at least 2,000 of the extra 6,000 officers promised nationally next year, and I agree with the Commissioner that London should receive 6,000 of the 20,000 promised nationally over the next 3 years. The government's allocated a little more than 2/3 of the officers that I've called for. I'll keep pushing the government to go further and faster in reversing their cuts so that we can properly tackle crime and violence. I'm also deeply concerned about the continuing uncertainty which remains over the funding of these new officers. The government's recent announcement has set a recruitment target for the MPS for 2020-2021, far below the number of officers we need, but it still failed to provide details of the specific funding from the £750 million they've announced. Given the government's apparent disregard for the significant challenges faced by a global city like London, I remain deeply concerned that the funding provided will be inadequate. A mere 23% of this funding to the MPS, in line with the officer numbers allocated, will ignore the additional challenges London faces and will leave the Met and Londoners shortchanged. There's even less certainty in future years. While the £750 million announced in the spending round is welcomed, the government's given no indication of whether this is one-off or long-term funding. The Met cannot plan effectively for the future without funding certainty. This impacts their ability to deliver for Londoners. I've taken the initiative in providing some degree of certainty through an increase in the business rates base for the Met. Although the Conservatives in the Assembly voted against my budget, our City Hall funding has made it possible to recruit 1,300 more officers than would otherwise be affordable were the Conservatives succeeded in that vote. But we urgently need the certainty of a multi-year funding settlement. Business rates are plugging only part of the gap the government's created. The government's announcement then provides neither the officers nor the certainty necessary to deliver the police in London needs.
Thank you, and I think that uncertainty is really worrying. The target is for the Met to recruit 1,369 officers, and I've worked out that works out at around £99 million, which is a significant portion of that early money. This week, the PCC heard from Deputy Commissioner Steve House, who said that we could train and deploy more than that. I don't think 1,369 is enough. and he asked the government to realise that London needs to be considered separately because of the pressures upon the force here. Is that a case you're making very strongly to government?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons why there is a international capital city grant is because there's a recognition that London is different from other police forces around the country, other cities around the country. To give you a comparator, New York, smaller size than London, has 37,000 police officers, significantly more police officers, but also significantly more police staff and other uniformed officers as well. That should be the comparator as far as London is concerned, not smaller police forces in smaller cities around the country.
Yep, thank you. And of course, you mentioned police staff, which are important part of our policing family, and you referred earlier to the cuts that have been made to date. Over the last 9 years, £850 million has been taken out of the police budget. They are still planning for a further £236 million worth of cuts to 2022-23. And what you've done is put in business rates, the Met are using their reserves to try and stabilise the number of officers. So this additional money is not going to make up for the austerity that's happened and the cuts that are still planned to be made. So my question is, do you have any reassurance from government that there is more funding to stop the further cuts? Because that, in effect, will cancel out any extra funding.
No assurance from the government. If you remember, not at this recent Conservative Party conference, but last year, Theresa May said austerity's ended. And we thought we'd get additional monies for public services. I'll just give you one example. When a police officer investigates a burglary, somebody's got to do forensics. There's some analysis needs to be undertaken. And the cuts the government's made over the last 9 years means the police staff that assist frontline officers to do their job has been hollowed out. And so the government is talking about more police officers, no certainty over the numbers or how many we get in the years going forward, but it's also not adding the additional sums of money we need for the whole system that the police need to properly prevent and then investigate crime.
So on the basis of what you've said and what the government has failed to deliver so far, it looks like we still could have a cliff edge around 2023 with our police numbers dropping.
As things currently stand, the Met Police Service is still facing a cliff edge in 21-22. We're very worried not just about the issues you've raised, also things like pension going forward as well. And it's really important the government answers the serious questions we have urgently.
Thank you.
46 seconds to you, Assembly Member Hall.
Put a question in there. If you are so concerned about police numbers, as indeed we have been all the way through, why on earth didn't you look at our budget amendment last year? You'd have had an extra 1,400 police officers on the street. I know you would have had to have given up your PR officers and all the things that you need to keep you happy. But actually, I suggest to you, Mr Mayor, that Londoners would have been much happier with an extra 1,400 police on the streets with our cuts to your budget.
Chair, the proposals from the Tories was nonsense. It was smoke and mirrors.
20 seconds
It was smoke and mirrors and would have stopped us funding things like helping those who are the victims of violence against women and girls.
Stopping splash parties,
it would have meant we've had to make... I'm sorry, Chair, I can't... Was that a question? Another question?
Will you carry on, please?
And so we looked at the amendment from the Conservatives,
Waste.
but it just didn't make sense.
Yes, it did.
Every bit of sense, and you know it.
Okay. You've got 13 seconds.
Mr Mayor, talking of budgets, I mean, don't you think our budget was fantastic? Because we proposed an extra 2,500 police officers for London.
Chair, I can't think I've ever used the word fantastic when thinking of the Brexit Alliance Party.
Oh, shame.
They're out of time. Okay. One question left, and that's in the name of Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, Chair.
Of
On the 3rd of September, the Secretary of State for Transport announced that each phase of HS2 is likely to be delayed by up to 5 years, and that the costs have risen from £62 billion to over £80 billion, an increase in the budget of £18 billion. Given this, I'm supportive of the HS2 review, looking at how savings can be made. I've written to Doug Oakervey, the chair of the review, setting out my support for the new capacity provided by HS2 and the issues pertinent to London. The review team also met with my Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and Skills and the TfL Commissioner in September. The terms of reference for the review referred to the possibility of services terminating at Old Oak Common. I set out the implications of this for the Elizabeth line. Terminating H2 service at Old Oak would mean the Elizabeth line would be full by the time it reaches central London, fundamentally undermining the benefits of the Elizabeth line. But even Euston's current tube connections won't be able to cope with a fully built HS2, which is why they need Crossrail 2. Similarly, if there is no Old Oak Common station, then the Victoria and Northern lines will not be able to cope with the passenger demand at Euston. Having stations at Old Oak and Euston will ensure HS2 brings much needed relief to many commuter lines into London by freeing up capacity and enabling more regional services from stations such as Watford Junction and Milton Keynes. HS2 will also regenerate large areas of London. The opportunity areas at Old Oak Common and Euston have the potential for 95,000 jobs and 27,000 homes. Without HS2, this growth would be at risk. I've suggested that the review team should look at the speed of the new service, as a lower speed scheme could deliver many of the benefits at a lower cost. Rather than speed, the focus should instead be on creating a new capacity, not least to provide relief to the existing crowded service out of Euston and King's Cross. My team will continue to work with the DfT and HS2 to support their considerations around how to reduce costs while still achieving the results that London needs.
Thank you, Mr. for that answer. In July 2019, Liz Pearce, the chair of the Old Oak Common OPCD, said that if we do not have HS2, it will put a whole different complexion on what we can do at Old Oak, especially in the next 10 to 20 years. And she says, in my personal view, it would probably set back the regeneration of the area by some 20 years. Do you agree with Liz that the current plans of Old Oak do not work if HS2 is cancelled?
The chair's absolutely right of OBDC. If the government decides not to have a station at Old Oak Common, we've got to, in my view, relook at the development at Old Oak Common, because the jobs, the homes, is contingent upon improved infrastructure. And if there's no station there, that leads to a limited improvement in infrastructure.
And supposing the terminus becomes Old Oak rather than Euston, what's the impact of that?
No, we need both. As I said in answer to your original question, Euston needs a new station there for a variety of reasons. The Elizabeth line, one of the reasons we're concerned about the current Euston plans is they're not redeveloping it all at the same time. We need a Crossrail 2 as well, because any gains made from one line is lost unless we can improve capacity. So my focus with H2 is less on speed, more on the capacity increases as well. There should be a station at Euston and Old Oak Common. We can't have one without the other.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Can members put your hands together and thank the students who have been with us for their endurance. And I hope they had some moments of enlightenment over the last couple of hours. The Mayor, can I thank you for your answers? Thank you very much. Part B, can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked. Thank you. Item 6, can I ask the Assembly to note the recent changes to 2 appointments made by the Mayor under Section 67, brackets 1, of the Greater London Authority Act 1999 as amended and as set out in the report. Noted. Thank you. Item 7, the date of the next meeting. The next meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 31st October. Interesting. There's nothing else going on that day, by the way.
Well, David will be celebrating.
We may see David in his party outfit, and that will take place in the chamber here at City Hall. There are no other items of... Oh, sorry. There's a briefing for members by the Royal British Legion in room 1.2 West. And that's beginning as soon as we can finish the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance today.